Zdravo svima, dobrodošli u još jedan Agelast podcast. Pre svega želimo se zahvalimo svima vama koji nas podržavate mesečnim donacijama na Patreonu. Ukoliko želite da nas podržite na taj način i budete producenti ovog podcasta, to možete uraditi preko linka koji se nalazi u opisu ove ili bilo koje druge epizode. I na Patreonu naravno imamo tonu drugog sadržaja koji nije dostupan inače za javnost. Također želimo da zahvalimo svima vama koji nas podržavate jednokratnim donacijama preko PayPala. Ukoliko želite da nas podržite na taj način, link se nalazi u opisu ove ili bilo koje druge epizode, bez obzira da nas slušate ili gledate. I naravno želimo se zahvalimo našim partnerima. Pre svega želimo se zahvalimo našim partnerima iz Fit Passa. Kao što znate, Fit Pass vam omogućava da jednom članarinom rešite brojne sportsko-rekreativne centre na teritoriji Republike Srbije, što je sjajna stvar. Stvar koju se ja, na primjer, koristio kad god otputujem negde, nalazim se na nekom mestu gde je potrebno da li da odem do bazena, da li da odem do neke teretane ili nešto, otvorite aplikaciju, pronađete najbližu koja je uvek dobro ocenjena i odete tamo, skenirate QR kod, dobijete popust ili trenirate besplatno, različitih opcija ima i uživate. Pored toga, oni imaju opcije za zaposlene, tako da ukoliko želite da poboljšate produktivnost i lojalnost svojih zaposlenih, to možete uraditi i da saznate više o tome preko linka koji se nalazi u opisu ove ili bilo koje druge epizode. I naravno, želimo se zahvalimo našim dragim partnerima iz Volta, kao što znate, koji su tu sa nama od samog početka. Volt je sajt za kućnu dostavu koja vam obezbeđuje ne samo hranu, nego različite namirnice i druge potrepštine za kuću. Velika konvencija, možete samo da se opustite, lupite pauzu, idete na Volt, napravite profil, iskoristite promo kod sa imenom našeg podcasta Agelast i ostvarite 3 puta po 200 dinara popusta na prve 3 porudžbe, dakle 600 dinara ukupno, i onda kupite da jedete, da pijete, da uživate i pustite ovu epizodu i uživajte u njoj. To je bilo to što se tiče naših partnera i sada je vreme da najavim svog gosta za danas. Danas ćemo imati nešto drugačiju epizodu koja će biti na engleskom jeziku. Moj današnji gost je Daniel Mate, ali moramo da damo malo konteksta, jel te, kada je on u pitanju. On je sin legendarnog doktora Gabora Matea i on je zajedno sa svojim ocem napisao knjigu koja nosi naziv The Myth of Normal, koja će uskoro izaći i u Srbiji, pretpostavljam u okolnim zemljama, pošto su prava već otkupljena i čini mi se da je sad na prevodu, zato što je knjiga objavljena u septembru mesecu u svetu i ona trenutno predstavlja jedno od najkapitalnijih dela koje se bavi problemom traume. Gabor Mate je čovek koji je rođen i odrastao u Mađarskoj, o čemu ćemo govoriti, 1944. godine, dakle u vreme nacističke okupacije, i koji je doživeo svoju prvu traumu, zapravo veliku, od onog trenutka kada je njegova majka morala da ga preda u ruke nepoznatoj ženi da bi preživeo, i kasnije u životu proveo ceo svoj radni vek baveći se upravo problemom traume. Njegov sin, Daniel Mate, sa kojim je napisao knjigu, je kompozitor, tekstopisac, aranžer, bavi se predstavama, ali također se školovao za školovanje filozof i psiholog također, i bavili su se raznim opcijama pomaganja ljudima i lečenja traumama. I nakon višedecenijskog radnog veka, dakle provedenog na polju traume, gde se Gabor Mate bavio i decom u najranijoj fazi uzrasta preko palijativnog zbrinjavanja, shvatili su da postoji jedna zajednička stvar koja prožima sve oblasti medicine i delatnosti o kojima se malo govori, a to je naravno trauma. Način na koji nas trauma oblikuje, način na koji nas trauma određuje i način na koji trauma nas prati kroz celokupan život i kako se izlečiti od traume. Dakle, jedan agregat razumevanja traume u svom najširem mogućem značenju i kako se trauma manifestuje u toksičnoj kulturi u kojoj živimo danas. Kada kažemo toksična kultura, mislimo na jedan vrlo specifičan pojam, ne na onaj kolokvijalan kako ga mnogi razumeju, ali sve ovo i mnogo više saznaćete upravo iz razgovora koji sledi. Dakle, moj sledeći gost je Daniel Mate, povodom knjige The Myth of Normal, zajedno sa Gaborom Mateom. Uživajte. First of all, welcome, and it's really a pleasure to have you here. And thank you for, taking the time to do this interview, because I know you just arrived from JFK, right?
Yeah, I just got off the plane at Nikola Tesla, and I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's like 8-hour flight or something, right?
Yeah, 8.5. So, and it's a 6-hour time difference. So, where I am, my body is confused. Let's put it that way.
and directly from the flight you came here, so it's much appreciated. Yeah, I just want to say that. And also before we start, I want to give credit where credit is due, right? So I want to say thank to Jelena Djokovic for introducing us.
Yeah.
Yes, and making this possible, right? And thanks to the Igor, I think, and people from Novi Sad who are organizing the event that you are coming here for. What kind of event is it?
Well, it's called Nikola Tesla's Planet. Is that what it's called? And I don't know so much about it, but it's a conference, I think, that's about the confluence of tech and innovation and also health, which I'm told that last piece is often neglected in the first two pieces.
Yeah.
And,
same as medicine, right?
Same as medicine, same as many other specialized areas of high achievement.
Yeah.
And I'm not a tech guy at all. And I suppose if I frame the word differently, I could say that I'm interested in innovation, but I've never been in like the entrepreneurial, businessy kind of world.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to speak to people who are looking to do what they're doing in a more wholesome, holistic, healthy way for them, because it's not just for them. You know, if I think what we create as creative, because I can relate as a creative person. I'm a musical theater artist. I write musicals. I write lyrics. And I know that the spirit in which we create affects not just ourselves personally, but it affects the creation.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We don't have a lot of English-speaking podcasts. You know, we don't run away from it, but we're basically based here, and most of our content is in local languages, right?
Yeah.
But the last one we had in English was also with a musician, but it was with I don't know if you know him, Bill Gould, the founder.
Hold on. Don't tell me. You're talking about the bass player of Faith No More?
Yeah.
Oh, my freaking God. Only one of my favorite groups of all. Are you telling me that that he is the last English-speaking guest?
Yeah, podcast in this podcast, yes.
I was literally recording a podcast episode yesterday. I'm starting a new podcast of my own.
Oh, nice.
In the new year called...
Tell us the name of it.
Let's Get Lyrical.
Okay.
And my co-host is Carice Van Houten, who's a Dutch actress who was on Game of Thrones.
Oh, nice.
She played Melisandre. And we're both lyric enthusiasts, and we've become friends recently. So we're doing this show, and our very first episode, we each brought 3 song lyrics that express something, like as introductions to ourselves, you know? Yeah. And what was funny is that we each brought a Joni Mitchell song. We didn't actually plan it that way. We didn't tell each other it was going to be. But one of the other songs I brought was by Faith No More.
Oh, yeah. Which one?
Everything's Ruined.
That's nice. That's nice. So, it's kind of an very underrated band. Hugely underrated. You know, they have a huge history with the countries in this region.
I know, and that's the thing. They've always been so much more well appreciated outside of America, both in South America and in Europe, including Eastern Europe.
Yeah, especially in Eastern Europe, because Bill is actively producing and promoting bands from this region. So there's a lot of bands who owe their success to Bill, and he's trying to promote the music from this part of the world in the States. So importing the music, producing the music, promoting the music, like doing so much. And also at the same time, he fell in love in this part of the world, and he's being regular guest here for 30 years or something like that.
Wow.
Like at least once a year he's here. And he fell in love with local cuisine and with local, drinks. So we have our local spirit called rakia.
Yes, I'm looking forward to meeting it.
Yeah, and he's producing actually one of the best rakias there is.
Wow.
From the local plums that there's a bottle here. So
oh, it's a plum liquor.
Yeah, it's a plum. There's an empty bottle, but this is Bill's. You can buy it only in the States.
Yebbiga.
Yes, it's a curse word. It's a F word, actually.
Well, that makes sense.
It's a curse word with an English twist on it.
Well, Faith No More are sick and twisted. I love them. And
we drank it during the podcast, actually. So this is just that
is Serbian.
This is just the
brandy.
Memorabilia now.
That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a song that's in Portuguese. They did a German beer hall song, and Mike Patton did a whole album of Italian film noir covers.
Yeah. Because the way Bill is connected with the Balkan countries, Mike is connected with Italy.
I love it.
Yeah, so they're kind of regular guests.
Well,
here.
I'm feeling a little bit special sitting in this chair. I got to tell you. Wow.
The second thing is, your father, Gabor Mate, he became a global phenomenon for a good reason. Yeah, for many good reasons.
Yeah.
And this latest book, The Myth of Normal, is just another one that kind of cemented the reputation of him. They call him the human whisperer.
Yes.
Which is kind of funny. But true at the same time. And this book, The Myth of Normal, is co-written with you.
Yeah, my name's on the title, on the cover.
So we're gonna jump into it, but before we start doing it, from the people who are not familiar with Gabor or with you, let's just give a little introduction about who he actually is and his story, which is also revealed here, and it's really not unknown.
Yeah.
But for many people who are just introducing this topic to them, maybe it's going to be probably of big importance in order to understand the big picture around the topic of trauma.
Yeah.
And then I would like to dedicate some time to talk about you and your career, because it's a very interesting mix of things that you actually do. And now you're a published author also. Where would be a good start with your father? Probably 1945, I guess.
44.
44. Well, 44 was when he was born.
Exactly. So, just keep in mind, I'll be telling this history as his son. So this is a biased telling, but there are some facts of the matter. He was born not very far from here. Budapest is 2 hours away?
It's 3-4 hours.
3-4 hours. Okay.
Yeah.
So he was born in January 44, which was not the ideal time to be born in this part of the world as a Jew.
Especially in Hungary. At the time, yeah.
And the Germans were already, I should know the history in more specific detail than I do, but I do know that the Germans were making their incursion into, toward Budapest from the outside of the country towards the center. And the deportations were happening. So, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but sometime that year, my dad's grandparents were deported to Auschwitz. His father, my grandfather, Andor, and now there's a Star Wars show named after him, obviously, Andor. Do you know that show, Andor?
No.
Disney Star Wars has anyway. That's the lead character. Yeah,
the lead character,
Andor.
Right.
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Andor was my grandfather was away in a forced labor camp with the Hungarian army, and I think a friend smuggled him in, like hiding the fact that he was Jewish. And it was a dangerous time. It was just a really dangerous time, and they were living under terrible, terrible conditions, and the Jews were forced to move into a very small area of the city, the Budapest ghetto. Because my grandfather did get, I think, like a 2-week leave to come home and see his son, but after that he didn't. My dad didn't see him again for another year. And my grandmother, Judy, didn't have much news from him, or they didn't have news of each other, so they really didn't know if the other was alive or dead. So it was just an extremely stressful time. And my dad tells the story of how his mother called the pediatrician a few days after he was born, saying, "Can you come see us? Gabor won't stop crying." And the doctor said, "Of course I'll come, but I should tell you, all my Jewish babies are crying." And the point that my dad makes there is, well, what do Jewish babies know of Nazis and genocides and world wars? They don't. What they feel is the stress of their parents, the emotional absence of their parents, which has nothing to do with a lack of love, anything but. It has to do with just people having limits, and the emotional realities that people live in is what gets transmitted to the child, not the conscious intentions of the parents. And, my grandmother was a hero, and she kept him alive by heroic means. At one point, they managed to find refuge in I think it was a Swiss-operated. Maybe I'm getting this confused with Schindler's List. I find myself more vague on the details than I really ought to be. But it was a converted glass factory, but just overrun with families. Latrines in the court, no bathrooms, just very unsanitary. My dad had dysentery, almost died. And at a certain point, not on a whim, but on a strong gut feeling, my grandmother, on the spur of the moment, I would say, handed him, and I think he was maybe 8 or 9 months at this point, handed him to a non-Jewish woman on the street and begged her, please take my baby to these relatives who happened to be living in relatively safer circumstances. And because she had no faith that she herself was going to survive, and she knew that he wouldn't. And this woman, talk about another hero, conveyed him safely to these relatives. And I think it was 6 weeks apart. Maybe it was fewer. I don't know. You have to go back and read the book. I'm forgetting the details. But, it was severe separation from his mother to save his life. So these were the circumstances of his birth. And meanwhile, my grandmother got word that her parents had been exterminated in Auschwitz. Her sister had been, my great aunt Marta had been deported to Auschwitz with them, but she actually survived. But they didn't know that until afterwards when she came home in a Nazi guard uniform, because that's the only clothes she could find after the camps were liberated. So just a very dramatic, horrific, adverse, stressful way to come into the world.
Yeah.
And that was his introduction to planet Earth.
Yeah, and the human race and the society.
And the human race and the society and the realities of being a person, yeah.
Yeah, and already experiencing the first detachment.
Yes.
Yeah, which is going to be very important in understanding, because what I love about this book is because it's intertwined with a lot of personal stories and a lot of testimonials, and which gives it a more of a dramatic touch, which it gives it sort of a novelic type of feeling. It's not just a narrow specific book designed for people within the who has some kind of expertise or knowledge.
Yeah, certainly not
within the area of expertise, right? So, how he ended up in Canada?
Well, the war ended in 1945, and his parents reunited. Very happy to be alive. They had another son, my Uncle János, a couple of years later, born into relatively happy circumstances. And he had a childhood growing up in Budapest. But then, first the Nazis, then the Soviets.
Yeah.
1956, the revolution. He wakes up to the sound of tank thunder of the Red Army coming in to crush the student uprising. And I think basically it was like my grandparents looked at each other and was like, nope.
We're not having this again.
Not again. We're getting out of here. And they trudged out of there, late one night in the rain through the mud into Austria. And there's many stories, in a lot of Hungarian refugees from 1956 in Canada and the United States who all left in the same way around the same time. It's interesting. I keep meeting a lot of, children of that Hungarian story. And I think the options were between New York, Montreal, and Vancouver or something like that. And they ended up on they landed at Halifax. They took a boat and got on a cross-Canada train and didn't get off until it hit the Pacific Ocean, and they ended up in Vancouver. And then they had another son in Vancouver, my Uncle George, who goes by Mate, because he's the Canadian-born Maté,
Mate.
Yeah. Of course, when I was growing up, my dad was Gabor Mate. That's how Vancouverites, that's how Canadians said it,
Yeah.
So that's, and then he met my mother in the late 60s at the University of British Columbia, where she was a cartoonist and he was a political columnist, and she was assigned to draw his caricature.
Yeah, during the Yugoslavia, we had Yugoslavian time. The former republics. We all used to be one country called Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
Especially at the time.
I remember. I was born in '75. I remember this.
Yeah. So yeah, and during the Iron Curtain and during the Soviet era and stuff like that, so we had a lot of refugees from Hungary, and we were helping a lot of them to cross over.
Yeah.
At the time, because Yugoslavia and the President Tito at the time, they were like in this very specific political situation where they could afford it. We were behind the curtain, sort of saying it, because if, how they like to say it, if communism was red, Yugoslavian communism was kind of pink. So he was a dictator, but benevolent one.
Yes.
But still a dictator, right? And he held his power also by various means. One of the means was this non-alignment agreement that he had with, Middle Eastern and African countries.
Yeah.
That's basically my origin story, because my father came, to study during the Yugoslavia in the 60s, and he was the member of, Flower Power 1968 generation, the worldwide. Quite opposite of the culture he's coming from. So Gabor basically dedicated his whole life dealing with trauma in a way, and discovering the topic and the influence of trauma in his life for many years later, right? But in his professional career, he was, dealing with patients from various groups, from palliative care to, nurseries. Mm-hmm. So he was dealing with children. He was dealing with people at the end of their life.
Yep.
And over the course of many years during his practice, he noticed commonalities, right?
Yes.
Yeah, something that binds them all together.
Yeah.
Which is the thing that you emphasize so much, called trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And before we go into trauma and the myth of Norma and why the book is called that, let's talk a little bit about you. So being son of Gabor Mate is not a easy thing to be.
How did you know?
Yeah, I don't know.
Who told you?
A hunch.
Oh, wait a minute. I talk about it in every single podcast interview I do.
Yeah. But he's also telling the story too.
It's true.
So,
it's true.
So it's coming from both sides.
Yeah, his reputation precedes me.
Yeah.
Look, not being anyone's son isn't easy. I haven't met a single person who, when they actually tell the truth about it, has an uncomplicated relationship with both of their parents, My dad, but see, here's the thing. One of the things people maybe don't realize is my dad wasn't always the Gabor Mate when I was growing up. I mean, he was, but on such a smaller scale.
Yeah.
He was not world famous. And even 10 years ago, he wasn't world famous. He was certainly a bestseller in Canada. Whenever his books would come out, they'd always be at the top of the charts. And he was getting more and more well-known. And when he started going on programs like Democracy Now! About 10 years ago in the United States, then his following in the States, and his speaking schedule has spread out. But when I was growing up, he was just a family doctor. And he wasn't working in palliative care or doing the addiction work. He was an obstetrician. He was delivering a lot of babies. He was just a busy doctor. And what set him apart from I know I'm speaking about him now, but this is just if I'm going to tell my story accurately, it's important to know that I didn't grow up with a worldwide celebrity as a father. That's happened much, much, much more recently.
Yeah. Fortunately.
Yeah, really. No, really. Yeah, because it was rough enough. And I think we're both older and wiser and able to handle it better. But he was just a busy local doctor, very much in demand. And I think what set him apart was that he was working, on Vancouver's east side with working class clients of diverse, a lot of immigrant clients, people he could relate to. He's always been someone he's always had that Eastern European kind of scrappy, he grew up a proud little communist. And then he got disillusioned to that. But he's always had a sense of solidarity with ordinary people, and unlike a lot of doctors who wanted to specialize and have well-heeled clientele and work and sort of have an easy go of it, he always wanted to go where the where the pain was, where the difficulty was. And that's true for a lot of doctors too, I guess. But he was very, very well respected. He was also a very outspoken social critic, so he would write op-eds every now and then about health and medicine, but also about politics. So he was a member of the Jewish community who was speaking out about Israeli crimes against Palestinians, which you did not do if you wanted to be a member of the Jewish community in good standing. So I grew up with a father who, when I would go to my Hebrew school, there's my jet lag mouth going. Preparing for my bar mitzvah, I'd have the rabbi pulling me aside, being like, "Listen, your father's a very good man, but you shouldn't listen to a thing he says about politics."
So he was a bit ostracized.
He was, and he was notorious, and he sort of relished in that because he was standing on his principles. So I had a father who was definitely noticeable. He stood out from the other fathers. He wasn't like a normal father, myth of normal. And then the palliative work, and then the work with heavily addicted populations, and then the book on ADD, and then everything else. So, but no, it wasn't easy having him as a father because he was a mess. And maybe in some ways a more obvious mess than some other fathers. Like he had a very dark side, and still does, but he's much more in command of it now. He's much more responsible for it now. And also, I don't have to live under his roof. And I'm 47. But as a kid, I have this very important, intense doctor father who loves his work and pretty much would rather be working than anything else, including spending time with the family. A lot of the time. Not always. There were a lot of really good times, but it was inconsistent enough that, and that's what children need, is consistency. It doesn't matter if the parents feel love towards the kids or who they can be at their best. The question is, what message does the child internalize overall? What's the gestalt? And if my dad loves me and delights in me 40% of the time and rages at me 20% of the time, and the other 40% of the time is cold and distant and is listening to his classical music with the Mahler or the Beethoven or the Bartok, never mind that, blaring in the living room, well, the message I'm going to receive is that the bandwidth for being loved is pretty narrow, and then I'm going to internalize things about myself, and that becomes the template for the trauma that I then carry. So, and I'll get to your question about trauma through this. So yeah, he had rages, he had moods, he had physical absences, and then there was his relationship with my mom, which was it was kind of a war zone in itself. I've called their marriage a jihad in some ways, and I don't mean that in the pejorative. When people apply that to terrorism, I don't mean that
in colloquial terms. Yeah.
No, but I mean the literal meaning, a holy war.
Yeah.
Because it was like they were. And they've stuck with it. 53 years. They just celebrated. It's amazing. They're awesome. But there was a lot of collateral damage along the way. And my mom has said publicly that had she, if she could do it over again, she would have left him when we were small. And she trusts that they would have found their way back to each other.
Oh, yeah.
But that it would have been better for her and better for us. And I can't disagree, because it was so fractious, it was so unpredictable, it was so dramatic constantly. So I grew up in an environment where my little brain, very bright kid, had to work overtime in order to keep my GPS, like where the F am I and what's going to happen and how do I stay feeling safe and connected. And so I came out of my childhood, and I think my dad and I have this in common. We both came out of our childhoods with certain superpowers, which have helped us achieve in the world and be impressive in the world and be recognized by others in the world. And every superhero, and I can, speaking as a Robert Downey Jr. lookalike, I'm on some authority to talk about the broken hearts of every superhero has a tragic origin story.
Yeah.
And this is what trauma is. Trauma is not what happens to, and so this is my beautiful little segue back to your other thing.
Yeah, I understand.
I didn't answer your question though about what I do in the world. Should I answer that before I go there?
Yeah,
okay.
That would be nice.
I really appreciate you just, because I'm in like 6 different time zones at once.
No worries. But also there's this thing with this, which is kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It has many good qualities to it, but also has its drawbacks. And that is, you have been in a circuit now, telling the story for so many times in so many different ways to so many people that it kind of became automatic response, right? And it has its values because you now, like a stand-up comedian, you have polished the story, and in a way, but on the other hand, it takes you away from being really connected sometimes in the conversation, and it's a balancing act. But it's
Dude,
a nice one.
you just nailed me. That's absolutely true.
No, I have some experience too, so no worries.
Yeah, and the jet lag doesn't help. But so yeah, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a trauma therapist. I am a musical theater composer, lyricist. I'm an avid enthusiast of songs. And I write musicals, which I never really thought I would do, but I got my MFA from NYU in writing musicals. So that's something I do. I've written several shows, including my first ever show. I mean, I write weird musicals. My first show was an adaptation of a Kafka short story. I mean, that's, I'm not writing a chorus line. I'm writing...
It's interesting in itself.
Yeah.
It tells a lot about you, too.
Yeah, exactly. And what else do I do? Well, I'm hosting this podcast coming up soon, and I'm a mental chiropractor, which is my own, and this is the way that because I like working with people. I just don't want to be a therapist, but I like having conversations that make a difference with people. I like having conversations that get to the heart of something, and I've certainly, I work in a very different way than my father does, and I have very different training than he does. And the mental chiropractic thing is something I made up. And it's a way that I have conversations with people that quickly perform an adjustment on something that's stuck in their life. Rather than getting all the way down to the depths of the trauma, which is more my dad's arena. For me, it's more like, okay, let's assume that you're traumatized. So am I. We all are. What's not working right now? And how could we quickly have you shift your point of view about it right now that would actually give you some real freedom.
Yeah, more of an acute thing than a chronic thing.
That's exactly right. Just like, and that's why the mental chiropractor is the term, and someone gave it to me, but it's a good metaphor.
Yeah.
Because it's an adjustment, it's an intervention, not a long-term course. It's not a process or a course of therapy. So I take walks with people while I do that. That's the mode of delivery. They're walking where they are. I'm walking where I am. If we happen to be in the same city, we do it face-to-face, but usually it's on the phone. How
did it start?
Well, it started in two parts. One, someone gave me the title mental chiropractor when they were pointing out how different I am than my dad, and I took that as a compliment, but I said, can you tell me what it is that I do? Because I know what he does, and I can't, and I don't want to do what he does, but I'm doing my own version. He said, well, you're more of a mental chiropractor. I said, I like that. I'm going to hold on to that. And then a few years later, a friend of mine in Western Canada asked me to take a walk with him because he needed a mental chiropractic adjustment on something he was suffering about, some work issue. And at the end of it, he said, you're really good at walking with people. I said, there it is, because I love walking with people. And I do my best thinking, my best outside the box, creating when I'm walking. I solve problems in my own head with my shows when I'm walking. And I like the vibe of walking with somebody. Yeah. So I took those two things, put them together, and created Walk with Daniel, and that's what that is.
But when was the initial walk, the first one? You know, who was the first person you helped, or how did it all start? Because you are educated. Well, you do have some education in psychology, right, and philosophy, as far as I know.
I have a BA.
Yeah.
From 25 years ago now. From McGill University with a major in psychology, a minor in philosophy and English literature. But there's an asterisk on that, which is that I dropped out of that degree and barely finished it. I just put the finishing touches on it back home in Vancouver. I dropped out basically with a nervous breakdown because I was so not into it, and there was such a gap between my what can I say? My personality's need to prove itself that I could do it even though I didn't care. Mm-hmm. And my heart and soul saying, no, I actually love art and music and theater. And so I was spending I was barely going to class. I was still excelling, which my ego liked. See, I can beat you suckers at your own. No effort, right? Yeah. But no effort, no passion. No effort, no immersion, no stakes, no commitment, no risk. meanwhile, I'm getting my hit of aliveness and self-expression and passion from acting in every play I can act in, and directing and writing songs and getting better on the guitar at this time, And finally, the tension between the two was just too much. And the last play I was in, or that I directed, ended. And the next day I tried to get up to go to class and I couldn't get out of bed.
Yeah.
And a month later I was out. So that degree, it begged the question, why did I choose psychology in the first place? My dad was just still a doctor, but he's not a psychologist, but he's certainly considered now an expert in psychological issues. I did grow up in a family where self-awareness and psychological discourse was the currency, and I wanted to understand myself. But it was kind of a default choice. I didn't give myself the time to say, hey, you know what? I'm an undergrad student. I'm going to take a year to try this. I'm going to
travel around the world.
Travel around the humanities department and take this course and that course. I arrived at McGill. I took a red-eye flight, got to my dorm, cried myself to sleep from homesickness and overwhelm, marched down to the psychology building and declared my major.
Yeah.
I didn't give myself, because they'd given me an extra year of credit because of some achievements I had in high school. But what that robbed from me was the opportunity to do what everyone else did, was just to have a tasting menu,
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, all of that was perfect because it set me up for the realization many years later that actually that the fact that I'm interested in human beings and that I'm committed to figuring out my own path and that I have my own healing to do doesn't mean that I need to be a professional healer like my father. And in fact, there's other ways to do healing work in the world, including making art. Yeah. And that's what's more authentic for me. But what's cool for me about the mental chiropractic thing is that, okay, in the end, I've come around to find a way to be a practitioner of something, but I didn't have to go get certified in it. I got to invent it, create it, just like I would create a song.
Yeah, so how did you circle back? Because, you had a nervous breakdown, you separated from, psychology and all of that crap, and you went straight for the arts, and you excelled in it, and, you developed in it, you spent your professional career in it.
Well, so first of all, I had to suffer through my 20s of doing none of that. I had to work odd jobs, selling Persian carpets, delivering groceries, and getting a job working with the same drug addict population that my father was working with. At a certain point in my late 20s, I had a moment of awakening. There's a particular personal development course I took where I realized that I had been stuck inside of a story called "This world wasn't built for me," or "I wasn't built for this world. I'm too good for it. I'm too bad for it." And that my undergrad experience, I had made that mean that that's the proof. It's just never going to happen for me. Yeah. And when I realized that that's actually just a story I made up, and it's the most upsetting possible story and the most limiting possible story, then I realized, hey, my mom's been trying to tell me for several years that she thinks I might really enjoy getting a graduate degree in the arts, and I've been fighting her because it contradicted my story.
Oh, it fits so well into the narrative.
Perfect. This is my little
of creating your own reality and then living it.
We always find evidence for what we need to believe is true in order to
quote unquote
explain
evidence.
Exactly. No, and it's airtight inside of our working theory, inside of our experience. And when I busted out of that, it was like Neo waking up out of the Matrix, or like taking a virtual reality helmet off that I didn't realize I was wearing.
That's like a blue pill, or a red pill. I always mix up the two.
Yeah. But it was the pill that is the riskier one, but the more rewarding one.
Yeah.
And of course, there's always a part of us that wants to be like the guy who says, "No, I'm gonna sell out my friends for the steak dinner." But fortunately, and when I woke up to that, I realized, oh my God, I would love to live a life where I'm an artist. I mean, that hadn't died in me, but it was killing me to be. It was slowly it was killing me softly, not to be, and not in a good way.
Yeah. Starving artist.
I was starving. Exactly. That's a really good. Oh, I like that. The choice was between risking being a starving artist, or starving my art. You know what I'm saying? Starving the artist in me. Can I borrow that? I like that.
Yes, of course.
So at that point, I applied to I very quickly, once I had that breakthrough, I realized, hey, I don't want to live in Vancouver. I want to live in New York City. I've always wanted to live in New York City. I've just been holding back. Looked at the NYU website, found their graduate musical theater writing program, said, hey, you know what? I don't know musical theater too well, but I know music and I know theater, and somehow at the corner of those two streets, I should be able to set up shop and do something good. So I moved to New York and I did that. And it's not like that was a slam dunk.
Of course.
I haven't had like a lucrative career in that. You can make a killing in musical theater. You can't make a living.
Yeah.
But I've done other things in and around it. And in terms of circling back to this collaboration with my father and the mental chiropractic work, that's a whole other story, and I'm going to have to write it someday, I think, as just a nonfiction memoir or maybe a musical. The short story is, in 2014, a year after winning a $100,000 award for Most Promising Lyricist in American Musical Theater, and there's an intimidating name for an award, Most Promising.
Yeah, and six figures?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure in a spotlight and a pressure on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, not as much spotlight.
Expectations.
Certainly on myself. You're very promising. Don't break your promise now, boy.
Yeah. We're looking at you.
We're looking at you, right? Well, and my ego wanted to believe it was going to change my life and open all kinds of doors. And my agent said to me, "Nah, don't expect that." And I did, and it didn't happen. And a year later, I was more depressed than I'd ever been, and I was more listless than I'd ever been. Wasn't writing anything, and I had an undiagnosed bipolar tendency at the time. I hadn't noticed that my big ups always led to big downs, and that neither of them was really the authentic me. So I was still caught in that cycle. That came later, recognizing that. But around that time, I met someone who lived in Vancouver, who was an apprentice of my father's in the Ajahuaska healing space.
Oh, that's a special chapter.
It is a special chapter. It's the untold story of my life. And I fell in love with this person. And I didn't just fall in love with this person. I made this person the answer to my problems.
Oh, yes.
So now I'm making someone the answer to my problems who is deeply, deeply, deeply professionally aligned with, and in fact learning from my father, and has been my father's client. So now all the boundaries are getting really blurry.
Oh, yeah.
And then I married this person. And a year later, I had left. I mean, I still was writing musicals, but I was thinking, well, maybe I'll become an Ajahuaska integration specialist like my dad. And now I'm apprenticing with my father. And she and I were in Peru leading a workshop in the style of my father, certainly trafficking on my father's name. The Maté name rang out in that space, right? And it's not really my world, but I was following along because I had lost the thread of who I really was, and that is a theme in my life. I find it, I lose it, I find it, I lose it. And then by losing it, I find it again, because it was at that retreat that someone first called me a mental chiropractor. A year later, the marriage completely fell apart. And that led me to really realize, oh my God, I've lost myself again completely. And so then I had to take the nutrients from that experience. And one of them was, well, I do like working with people, but I'm not. Psychedelics is not my thing. I mean, they're valuable, but that's not my world. And therapy is not my world. I do this thing that's mental chiropractic. It's quick. It's get in, get out, and then get back to the piano.
Well, forging your own path is exactly as difficult as you have described it, and I think it's kind of a necessary path.
Yeah.
There are a couple of pit stops along this storyline that I would like to address.
Please.
First of all, there's always the need for growth in order to take a leap of faith in professional, in professional life, because jumping from one place to another place, discovering, quote unquote, what you want and what you desire and what is, more suited for you, takes a certain kind of, emotional growth, certain type of life experiences, to dare to wish, to dare to look at yourself and what is it that you really want. It's amazing how many people have no idea what they want, and they have no means to look at themselves. They don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
They don't know how to know what they want. And once you realize what you want, then there's this another layer of it, and it's now I'm invested. Once you're invested, there's a risk factor to it. Now, if you lose everything within psychology, as a psychology student, it means nothing to you.
That's right.
But losing something in the world of arts, that's gonna hurt, right?
Well, I mean, it might hurt my pride or my ego, but in terms of my heart and soul, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. So you have to kind of, be ready for it, and it is a leap of faith. But once you it's like in Indiana Jones movie, the Last Crusade, right? When he has to
choose the chalice.
Yeah, no, when he has to do the leap of faith to walk the invisible bridge.
Yeah.
He has to believe it's there.
Yes,
right?
that's right.
So the bridge is there, but he has to believe in it first, and he has to take the first step. Once you do it, it becomes easier.
That's right.
But that particular one step, it's really difficult to do, and then you have to realize that you're just at the beginning of that path, of that journey.
Yeah.
And in the beginning of the journey, one thing that everyone is going to do is make mistakes. You're going to make a lot of fucking mistakes.
That's right.
And you have to be comfortable with making those in order to learn.
Yeah, and I think, I agree with you that you have to trust that the bridge is going to materialize in front of you. Yeah. But something else is required for me to even take that leap of faith, is it has to... I have to have a taste of what it is. It has to be so worth it to me to take that step. In and of itself, taking that step feels good. Yeah. So it's not just like, oh, I hope this is the right thing. No. When I realized that I have musicals inside of me that haven't been written, well then, okay, yeah, is it a leap of faith to like move to New York and get a graduate degree at age 30? Sure. Could I fail? Sure. But that is so freaking cool. Yeah. Like, okay, I just want that more than anything else, and so then all of a sudden the fear becomes kind of because I also have to take an honest look at what's the cost of not doing it, and I'm the kind of person who can't settle for very long without suffering intensely, and I think people who don't know, I love how you put it, don't know how to know what they want. Yeah. You don't know how to know what you want. It's a skill how to know what you want. One of the things that keeps that stuckness in place is an being desensitized to one's own, the suffering that comes from not being oneself. Yeah. And that's another thing we talk about in this book, that one of the things that trauma does to us, whether it's the big T traumas that my dad suffered in his childhood, and maybe I had one or two, but nothing like his, or the small T traumas that most of us go through in childhood, which is just not being seen or heard, having to compromise our authentic selves in order to hold on to the parental relationship in some way, having to contort ourselves and become some sort of constrained version of ourselves with outsized strengths, but also weaknesses that we hide. One of the consequences that we don't know ourselves and we live an alienated life, and we feel disconnected from the source of that which gives us that confidence, that which gives us that joie de vivre, right?
Yeah.
But once you get back in touch with that, it is so delicious that not to act on it after a certain point just becomes silly.
Yeah.
And so I almost don't, I try not to talk to people in terms of, well, it's a real big risk. I'm like, no, just be honest. What's it like when you're not embracing when you don't know, what's it actually like to not know who you are? And when people really confront that, they have to deal with the real pain of that alienation. And once you really face that pain, then I think that gives you fuel to be like, okay, great. Well, there must be something else. What is it? You see it, you grab it, you go for it, and it carries you along.
We're going to jump into it pretty soon. So I don't want to give those information without a context to people.
Very good.
Yeah, but one thing that I do want to address is that feeling that you're talking about.
Yeah.
How I recognize it is when you realize that you're loving the process.
Yes.
Once you realize you're loving the process, the end goal is not important so much.
That's right.
There is an importance, once you start the journey, it's all about the goal. Mm-hmm. But once you reach the goal, you realize it was all about the journey. So, and if you loving the process is a sure sign that, you're maybe on the right path.
Well, and there's a reason for that. It's because the process is loving you.
Yeah. Yes.
Because true. What is the process? You're in the process of becoming yourself. Yeah. That should feel good.
Yeah.
It's like, the Leonard Cohen song Hallelujah that's been covered way too many times by people. No one needed to cover it after Jeff Buckley did it.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. It's my wife's favorite album, the Jeff Buckley one.
Oh, Grace?
Yeah. Yes,
Come
Grace.
on.
Yeah.
I miss that guy. But that opening line, I only realized recently how it always sounded like an esoteric line to me, but actually, well, I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. Never mind the rest of the line. That secret chord that when we play it, when we strike it, it harmonizes with us. We are the tuning fork. And you don't have to be a spiritual or religious person to get this, that God or our authentic essence just likes it. It's like, ooh, yeah, that feels like me. That's the process that you're loving, because the process is you're in resonance with it.
Yeah.
And so it should feel good. And that's a really, the good feeling of that is a really good guidance system, I think, to know that you are on that right path.
Yeah. But you also mentioned one thing, which is, we understand it, but it's kind of difficult to address it once you're in the zone. And once you're out of that zone, it's difficult to create a bridge between the zones.
Yes.
So, for example, you say, okay, I don't know what I want. I don't know who I am, whatever. And you ask me, how do I feel about it?
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a problem, because often we have no idea how we feel about
Correct.
it. And once you have passed that and you break through on the other side, and then you're looking back and someone's asking you for an advice, it's very difficult to give one. Because even when I'm trying to trace my steps, how did it happen? I have no fucking idea. It's really difficult to know. And it's really difficult to break it into the steps. And that's more of a comment than a question. But the question now is, one thing you said that you have your experience in Ajahuaska ceremonies, right? And dealing with trauma and addiction, probably through those ceremonies. I've been through those ceremonies too, right? And what I don't like about that part of healing process is there's a huge global tendency for people who are practicing it to feel and think that's the only way.
Oh yeah.
And it's like the only path, and I think it's just one piece of the equation, and one piece of the equation that probably for some it's not necessary at all, and I like to say it. Somebody needs a hug, somebody needs some sex, somebody needs a conversation. And then again, somebody needs ayahuasca. It's not for everyone. I truly believe it's you have to try at least few other things before you venture into that one. But it can be really helpful, in many different ways. But I take it as a cue more than a path, right? It just opens up a door, and it's your decision if you're going to go through it or not. And this drives us back to, again, this, because after all of those experiences, what I like about this book is it's not only addressing trauma, and it's like is it a micro or a micro? Like zooming in on the trauma.
Micro.
Yeah. It takes it all the way back
to the macro,
and showing, the big picture. And it shows that trauma is actually like a multi-layered cake. And it shows up on every layer of the society. Like the individuals in their life, in their family lives, in their surroundings, in their working surroundings, in their friend surroundings, in every aspect of life, and in a society, in culture. And this is where I guess most of the criticism coming from, because when you venture into culture and society, people tend to say it's ideological.
Right.
Yeah, but I think it's not.
Yeah, I mean, is it ideological to point out what the prevailing ideology around you is that other people don't think is an ideology?
Yeah.
That's what we're really doing in here, because the myth of normal is that what we're naming as the myth of normal, if we're pointing to something at all, is an ideology, which is an idealized way of seeing things that we are committed to more than we're committed to seeing the way it really is. And its shades are the way we look at things. It's a lens through which we look at everything. And it may have its virtues, but it also has its limitations and its drawbacks and its consequences. And we're naming what that ideology is, what that fantasy is, and the physical, material, psychological, emotional, economic, real life consequences for human beings in terms of health and wellness. Trauma is a multi-layered cake, and you can look at it, but human life is a multi-layered cake. I mean, at the most macro level, what we're saying is, I mean, and there's an anthropologist, I think, maybe that's what she is. Her name's Darcia Narvaez, who we quote often in the book, and she talks about how human beings are the only beings on the planet who have become species atypical, which means we're so marvelously talented at adaptation that we've managed to adapt to an environment that is so complete. We're living in ways that are completely antithetical to how we actually evolved. We have become inured to and accustomed to living in ways that directly go against our evolutionary given needs because we're very adaptable. And those include connection, a web of community, full self-expression, an environment that allows us to mature into our full selves while feeling secure that we're unconditionally held and loved, feeling connected to nature. Think of how we evolved. Nature was the music we listened to. We had to listen to nature and speak its language, or otherwise we wouldn't survive. Hunter-gatherers going with the weather, with the food patterns, and we had to rely on each other. So much of the way we live cuts us off from that. So that's at the most macro level. So that there is a trauma, there's a species-wide trauma of, there's this thing called human nature, which is correlated with what human beings evolved to need. And we can't become that in an environment that doesn't provide for those needs. So that's a fundamental rupture from our essential nature. So we're walking around kind of, lost on that level. And then there is trauma within nations, right? I just landed in a country that has some trauma in its...
a lot of trauma.
In its collective past,
It's the one thing that you tell, it's the one thing that you're talking about a lot here. It's generational
Absolutely.
trauma. Generational trauma. So that's why I always tell people whenever they whenever they dismiss anything like, I have no ideologies. And then I'm like, no, you have an ideology of not having an ideology.
That's exactly right.
And therefore also people are so adaptable. You just look at the physical form of adaptation that we can take. For example, we can be anorexic and we can be obese. We can climb Mount Everest. We can dive on a single breath, more than 100 meters under extreme pressure. We can adapt. We are capable of adapting. We can go fasting, and without food for a very long time. And, we can do various different things.
We can live in the North Pole. We can live in Ethiopia.
Yeah, in tropical areas or whatever.
Yeah.
We can adapt.
Yeah.
And if we can adapt in our physical form so much, how much we can adapt in our, spiritual, emotional, whatever, psychological form.
And this is the rub. That's another superpower, adaptation, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible talent. And it's marvelous and it's miraculous, but it's also very dangerous because it means we can get used to almost anything.
Yeah.
Because one of the ways that we adapt emotionally to harsh environments is we stop noticing it.
Yeah.
Or we stop feeling it. And we just learn to survive it. And when we're living in a society, and again, look, you don't have to be a Marxist or there's no particular ideology that we're advocating in this book. Yeah. My dad and I each have our political views, but the point is not to replace capitalism with something, but it's to look at capitalism honestly.
Is what it is.
You're living in a society that basically says it's natural and fitting that human beings should live in tiers, TIERS, of comfort and power and subordination over each other. that some people should have a whole bunch, and that everyone needs to work their asses off to keep things going exactly the way it is, and that nothing is more important than material acquisition on the individual level, and that's what self-interest is, okay? Which has nothing to do with how we evolved.
Yeah,
just nothing.
So let's start then.
Yeah.
First, before we start, I just wanna say, because there's another book on the table. This is a book that I recommend to everyone, and it's kind of led me to Gabor at the same time. It doesn't mean anything to you because it's sincerely created in but maybe you know it. It's Alice Miller, and the book is I would translate the drama of the gifted child. Yeah, the drama of the gifted child, which I.
You know what's funny? Someone just sent me an email yesterday being like, "I want you to know that you're not alone in having a very wise, talented, famous healer parent and having a complicated relationship with them." Apparently there's a documentary about her son.
Oh.
And all of his extremely dark, complicated aspects of his relationship with her, which I haven't watched yet.
I haven't even heard of it. So that's a recommendation.
Yeah.
Mental note.
Michael Miller.
Michael Miller, mental note. I'm gonna have to take a look at it.
Yeah.
Which I read like I don't know, month after my 40th birthday, and I was like, whoa, I should have read this.
I remember that book was on the shelf when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And I always kind of took it personally. I'm like, because I used to read my parents' parenting books. I would take them off the shelf because I wanted to know their tricks.
Oh, okay.
Because I knew they were trying to figure me out and trying to control me. Because I was like, like that song from The Sound of Music, how do you solve a problem like Maria? It was like, how do you solve a problem like Daniel? And I would see them like reading the parenting books and talking about them like in front of me, Yeah. So I saw the drama of the gifted child. I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm the gifted child and I'm the drama. Anyway,
but
I know that's not what she means by gifted child.
Yeah, it's more of a sensitive child.
A sensitive child, that's right.
Sensitive child, right?
Yeah.
So let's dive in. The myth of normal. Two things that we have to dissect first, and not dissect, more of a how would not decompose, but more deconstruct. Deconstruct is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, the thing that we have to deconstruct.
I like decompose though. I like that image.
Yeah, deconstruct is what is normal. Mm-hmm. How do we perceive normal, and how do we deconstruct it in order to understand what this book is about?
Well, that's the joke, isn't it? Because normal is what we don't perceive.
Yeah.
I mean, there are legitimate uses of the word normal, as we say in the introduction. If you're a doctor and you're trying to make sure a person's going to stay alive, you want to make sure that their blood temperature stays within normal range. If you're a doctor with a pregnant patient who's saying, I am having this complication, you say, oh, that's normal for your trimester, right? Yeah. So those are valid, basically just statistical.
But we can also call them typical, maybe.
You could say typical,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
But the normal is the word that is used in medical practice. But when we talk about normal in the sense of the myth of normal, it's that to which we have become accustomed that isn't necessarily natural or healthy. But the nature of that is, you said, what do we perceive as normal? It's what we don't perceive. We tell the story, or we recount this beautiful little allegory that David Foster Wallace gave at a commencement speech about two fish who were swimming along one day, two young fish swimming along, having a nice time. And they pass by an older fish, and the older fish says, "Good morning, boys. How's the water?" And they keep swimming along, and they turn to each other, and one of them turns to the other. But a few minutes later, says, "What the fuck is water?" Because they don't need to notice it, because they can just take it for granted. Well, so what is the water that we swim in that we don't even notice? And we're trying to draw people's attention to things that they're not even perceiving. So, for instance. First of all, it starts with noticing it. And one of the ways you notice it, just like you were saying before, like creating that bridge from, I don't even know how I feel. Well, one thing is to just take a look around and say, how's that going for you? So in a personal life, you say, well, how's that not knowing how you feel going for you? Well, I'm kind of depressed and I don't really know what I'm doing in my life. I'm kind of bored and I'm, smoking a lot of pot and, watching a lot of bad TV. Well, because that's how that's going for you. That's a clue as to something.
Yeah.
That's not the secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. On the societal level, how's normal going for us? Well, we got skyrocketing cancer rates, autoimmune rates. Suicidality is going way up, especially after all the COVID lockdowns. Mental health diagnoses going off the charts. Just unprecedented spikes in chronic health issues in the most wealthy nations in the world during the most health, the very first line of the book, which I will take personal credit for having written this sentence. In the most health-obsessed society in human history, all is not well.
Yeah.
How can that be? Well, something is off, right? So there's something about what we've become accustomed to, or acculturated to, we might say, given that it's a question of culture, that isn't doing us any favors on the health level. But because our ideology says, no, this is how it's supposed to be, then we're left to cope with that. So then what becomes normal is, well, okay, now we're going to fight cancer. We're going to do marathons for cancer and marathons for multiple sclerosis. I'm not trying to denigrate those things. But we act as if they're sort of antagonistic intruders who have landed from outer space, who are messing up our nice normal. And we just need to kill the aliens or solve the mystery and we can go back to being normal. But what if these diseases, or at least their prevalence, their flourishing, their metastasizing, you might say on us, are an expression of how we live, not an interruption of how we live, both on the collective and the individual level. So there's all kinds of evidence in the book, and now I'm jumping a little bit ahead, that, and my dad's been cataloging this science, which is not his own original research, but he's been synthesizing it ever since his book, When the Body Says No, 20 years ago, that much of chronic illness is an expression of, or it's potentiated by, or it predisposes people to, it's predisposed by certain fixed, normalized personality traits that are expressions of people being cut off from themselves, which itself is an expression of trauma. So people who suppress their anger.
Yeah.
People who can't say no. People who have to rigidly identify with their role and always do their duty and never express themselves, on that. Never take the leap of faith bridge,
Yeah.
There are physical consequences or there are emotional and psychological consequences. And, of course, here's another thing that gets normalized. The Western medical ideology, really a superstition, that mind and body are separate. They ain't.
Yeah.
They can't be separated. They're the same. They're not even connected, because the same thing can't be connected to itself. It's just two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
So all of these things, I'm starting to shade in that picture that you're asking about of what is normal. There's so many things that have become normalized that are, we can work our way backwards from how it's going to say, well, why is it that way? And maybe there's a simpler reason why our health is going the way it's going than that we have to solve this pandemic and this disease and this mental health crisis and this separate cancer of this body part. Maybe it's all connected.
Yeah, sort of a holistic, approach to things. I just want to
holistic approach, but also a good detective approach too. I mean, Sherlock Holmes would always want to have the simplest, most elegant explanation.
Yeah. How it doesn't matter how improbable, if he's the only one left.
It only seems improbable because we're looking at it in a way that we've become used to.
This Eric Fromm, the Sane Society quote is perfect for the book. So I just want to read it. I don't want to paraphrase it, right? The fact that millions of people share the same vices does not make these vices virtues. Mm-hmm. The fact that they share so many errors does not make the errors to be truths. And the fact that millions of people share the same forms of mental pathology does not make these people sane. It's so nice. It's so well put.
Yeah.
It's all well put. And also the myth of normal, trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture.
Yeah.
So there's another thing that we have to put in the mix.
Yes.
It's a toxic culture.
Yes.
And regarding the fact that the one of the most surprising, what I love about the book also is it doesn't shy away from its sources.
No.
It's sort of you can use it also as an aggregate of various different authors and people who had a lot of experience in practice. All of them put together in a very well.
The book is a conference. It's a clearing. It's like my dad. I mean, I think he interviewed 250 people. He gathered 25,000 articles. It's a crazy amount of research.
How big was the research actually?
10 years, I think literally 25,000 articles.
That's a lot.
You
had to go through all of them?
I didn't. No, I came aboard relatively late in the process, with 4 years to go. My job was to make sure the damn thing got written.
Yeah.
and that it was readable.
Yeah.
But
That's no easy feat.
No, not with this much material. I mean, my dad's a good writer, but we wanted this book to have a little bit of a bit more. I mean, we wanted this to be for the broadest possible audience, both geographically and culturally speaking. No matter what your politics are, no matter what your education level is, and I tried to bring in just a bit more lightness, a bit more of a contemporary feel, things like that. But the work, the research, incredible amount of work went into this on his part.
One of the one of the hardest one to take for me of all those from all those I lost the word examples, right? Was the connection between agreeable people and ALS. It's like that once I've read that, I was like, that's not possible.
Well, especially given the study that we cited where nurses basically were asked to predict based on just meeting patients or reading their personality profiles, which of them would get ALS or which would test positive for it. And their success rate was something like 85%. And they would say, this person can't have ALS, they're not nice enough. And when we say nice, we don't mean kind, we don't mean benevolent or good-hearted. We mean excessively to a self-abnegating degree, always putting other people's needs first, suppressing one's own suppressing one's own anger, that kind of compulsive niceness that you can just feel with somebody, which has a kind of tension underneath it. Why is there a tension? Because they're stuffing down their own feelings, and they don't, and that's the thing, on the individual level, they've completely normalized it for themselves. So they don't even know they're doing it, and there's a reason for that, because those coping patterns come from childhood as a way to survive traumatizing situations. If we gather from our childhood environment that if I'm angry, mommy and daddy won't be okay, or they won't love me, or I won't get the love I need. Well, it's not enough for me to say, well, okay, maybe just consciously hide it from them every time they're around. No, much, much better if my brain says, okay, let's forget how to be angry. Let's stuff it away. Let's normalize being nice and just always being agreeable. And if you think about it for 1 second, my dad always makes this analogy. I think it's pretty self-evident. The immune system and the anger system, the emotional system, have exactly the same purpose, which is to welcome in good stuff and keep out the bad stuff. But if you teach, if you enforce on your emotional system, don't be angry, it means that you'd never get to say no, which means you have no say over what's coming in and what's going out. And since these systems are not only connected, but in fact unitary, you're messing with the immune system. And what is autoimmune disease? Literally, it's the immune system attacking itself, getting confused about what's good for it, what's bad for it. So yeah, it's crazy. Not crazy in the sense of insane, but it seems outlandish when you first read about it. But that's just one data point among so many that we try to bring in to show that all these things are connected, and of course, Western medicine doesn't want to see those connections.
Well, that's one thing. There's so many lights are are on now.
Is it going well? Do you need anything more from me, less from me?
Yeah, no, I think it's going well, and I'm gonna need more from you.
Okay.
We have just started, but we're not gonna take too much of your time.
You're the Joe Rogan of.
How much did Joe Rogan? Is there a Joe Rogan effect after the episode?
Oh yeah,
because he has a massive platform.
Oh yeah. But my dad's done a lot of big shows, but Rogan was the biggest.
Yeah, I think it was the biggest.
And I thought it was one of the best interviews he's ever done because it was a different kind of interviewer.
Yeah, it was a freestyle.
Freestyle, and someone who's not inside necessarily of the same sociocultural world that many of.
Yeah.
Like he's got a new age side to him, but in sort of a dude bro kind of way.
Yeah.
And he's got listeners who are also Jordan Peterson fans.
Yeah.
And like there's no reason what we're saying in this book shouldn't speak to anybody.
Yeah.
But
I think there was a Jordan Peterson reference at one point.
He
missed.
He didn't name the name, but
but I think it went over his head.
Might have. But what I liked was that there was one moment where Rogan push back slightly on something my dad said.
Yeah.
'Cause my dad was talking about, what was it, failure? And he's basically saying there's no such thing as failure or something like that, or you're. And Rogan's like, he's speaking as like a extreme athlete. Like, no, you gotta like you gotta have room in your life to like say, no, that was a failure. Not I'm a failure as a person, but like, if Novak Djokovic like
when
goes
they were
out,
talking about Usain Bolt, I think,
Usain Bolt, right?
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and I liked that Rogan just didn't take my dad's word for it. He actually pushed back on it, and so it felt like a real conversation between equals rather than like, bowing at the feet of the guru.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why he's so big.
Yeah, I think he's. If it's possible for someone that big to be underrated, I think he's underrated.
Yeah, he's very underrated. Because the way he looks, and some episodes are questionable, but
and there's so much hysteria about him too.
Of course, yeah. Well, but that's more of an overseas type of thing. Not here, not so much.
Not.
Yeah.
It's entirely to do with the U.S. culture war.
Yeah. So let's go back to. Yeah, I wanted to just make a stop here, one small pit stop. You said Western medicine. You have, you said a couple of times Western medicine separates everything. Mm-hmm. And one thing that during the Ajahuaska ceremony became perfectly clear, and researching the indigenous tribes, in the Amazon and different cultures, you have Siberian shamans, and you have Nganga healers in Southern Africa, and so all over the world.
Now I'm imagining ayahuasca with like Tuvan throat singing or something.
Yeah, Mongolian throat singing. It would be trippy, right? Or maybe Aboriginal didgeridoo, right, or something like that. That would be insane. But what I've noticed.
That's not why you should do ayahuasca. Don't do it to have a nice.
No.
It's not the Pink Floyd laser light show.
What I like to say, there's things you want, there's things you need, and those two things are not necessarily the same.
Yeah, and then there's things you're going to get that you can't plan for, but go into it with a hard intention, not like, I want to have a cool trippy experience, because it'll kick your ass.
It will. So one thing that I've realized is during the Enlightenment era in Europe, we kind of departed from during the rise of science.
What an ironic name for it, the Enlightenment.
Yeah, it's an ironic name, but it is what it is. We departed from the dream state, right? And while I was listening to the shamans from the Amazon, they have never separated those two.
Right.
Wake state and dream state are the same part, the two parts of the same life.
Yes.
And they make many decisions depending on what they have dreamed last night. Mm-hmm. Or they're waiting for a dream to come in order to make a decision, which is why it's so difficult to make an agreement with them, because you can wait for them a day or 2 months or 2 years until they have, the vision, right?
Yeah, well, they're not divorced from the mythic.
Yeah,
and now we're talking about myth in the positive sense of the word,
which is at the end
which
of the book.
Return to at the end of the book, which I insisted on, because the word myth has a pejorative connotation, which is like old wives' tale. It's just a story. It's just an untruth. But human beings have learned from and grown from and built culture around myth in a very powerful, positive way. Our entire existence, and what you're talking about is the divorce from being able to see the more than human, the dream state, the dream reality that is also part of the reality,
which is also which is also part of the reality. Until the
which is where everything is connected. Because in dreams everything's connected, right?
Yes.
That's why we dream, to connect dots.
And the psychoanalysis, the birth of psychoanalysis, kind of pushed back on and
especially with Jung.
Especially with Jung. Put it back where it's supposed to be, but still left separated.
Sure.
Still left separated. We do
conscious, unconscious.
We do analyze the dreams and in therapy, right? But it's not integrated anymore as a, not the part which cannot be separated from reality. It diverges itself from it long time ago.
It's all individual. You're not doing psychotherapy in a circle or with your fellow villagers. You're going to see your analyst.
That's why the ceremonies are so nice, because there's a group energy to it.
For sure.
Yeah, and that's also one aspect that I'm trying to implement in my life, having this group type of thing whenever making a decision, But, put that aside. Another quote that I liked in the beginning of the book was, culture can be healthy or toxic, nurturing or murderous, right? From Tom Hartman. And let's bring in this myth of normal or normalcy, whatever the word is. Let's bring to the mix the toxic culture.
Okay. So one of the nice things about the word culture, because some interviewers have asked me, so why is our society toxic? And I say, well, we don't call it trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic society. We use the word toxic culture for a reason, because culture actually has a biological component to it. A culture is the context, the chemical context in which you would raise an organism. So if you go drink kombucha, where you look on the back, you say active bacterial cultures, which is to say cultured bacteria that were raised deliberately in a particular environment to become a certain kind of bacteria. It's a broth that you'd have in a petri dish or whatever with a certain pH level, a certain temperature, all that. It's supposed to be hospitable and conducive to the growth of a particular species. And if it's the appropriate culture for that species, the species will proliferate, be healthy, happy, and live a long and prosperous life, at least by bacterial standards.
Yeah.
If, though, you started seeing those same microbes dying off or fighting each other or splitting in half or mutating or, just getting sick, you might say, well, has there been a sudden genetic revolution in these microbes? But that's unlikely. That's not how genes work. Okay, well, it's probably the wrong culture.
Yeah.
The culture, it's not that the culture is morally right or wrong. It's just not appropriate for these organisms. It's toxic to them. Because what's toxic to one creature is not toxic to another. Like, what is it? Like, isn't peanut butter toxic for dogs?
Yeah, well, sugar it is.
Sugar, okay.
Sugar is. Yeah,
right.
Sugar, chocolate.
Right. Now, it's arguable that it's toxic for us too, but a lot less, and we can metabolize it better, right?
Yeah.
So toxic is a relative term, not an absolute term. It's not a judgment. It's actually an assessment of, is this good for this thing to become itself? Well, first of all, then you have to ask, well, what is itself? What is human nature? Which is what we get into not far into the book. But the basic contention is that many aspects of our culture, starting from the very ideological building blocks of who this culture takes human beings to be, which is to say strictly individualistic, self-interested, but self in the most narrow sense, atomized units of profit maximization and loss minimization, pleasure-seeking.
Infinite growth,
right, which is a contradiction in terms.
Especially with climate. Climate changes.
Yeah. I mean, what they mean is infinite proliferation.
Yeah.
It's not really growth. Because, again, growth in the developmental sense means growth. There's a growth chart. There's a growth, what can I say? There's a blueprint of how growth is supposed to happen. It's not willy-nilly. It's not just like untethered from, it's not just unlimited expansion. Even we know the universe is expanding, and we know it's going to collapse one day.
Yeah.
There's no unlimited growth for anything, even the biggest thing. So, what were we talking about? Culture. Yeah. So our culture is based on, and then it's based around reinforcing, justifying, and re-entrenching a bunch of assumptions that at least should be questioned, given how it's going. And it turns out that when we question them and really ask, how well does this line up with what human beings actually need? Not so well, it turns out. Those assumptions play themselves out in how we raise children. Any culture that transmits knowledge to parents and communities about how to raise children is going to do so in its own image, right? So if you're living in a warrior culture, a samurai culture, well then you're going to raise them in a tradition that leads them to be ready for battle if they need to be, right? If you're living in a fishing community where fishing salmon is the most important, you're going to raise them to know the salmon, the patterns of the weather, of the rivers, to take care of the water, all that kind of stuff. our society raises children in a particular way. How does it raise them? Well, there's a lot of diversity of parenting approaches. But if you look at sort of just the mainstream parenting approaches that have been normalized the most in the 20th century, it's behavioral modification, socializing the children to behave right, to be acceptable to others, as opposed to become their full selves. There are no communal rites of passage that help children discover, source from that dream side of themselves why they're here in the world.
Yeah.
Like, why was I put on this planet? What is my connection to the sky and the earth and life and my ancestors and the people who are going to come in the future? There's none of that. Kids are raised to conform, to obey, and or to excel, or just to be invisible. Those are sort of your options. And, I guess excelling sounds like the best one, but it's not really thriving.
Yeah.
Because it's not self-generated, it's not self-discovering, and it's not connected to a sense of obligation to one's species, one's community, one's village, one's people, one's place. It's untethered, it's unmoored, it's unrooted. It's all about the individual. I need to be the best me I can be. Well, who's that? Well, whoever my parents say I should be, or whoever my teachers say I should be. Or I'm going to become the opposite of what they say I should be. But that's not guidance. That's not... And this is all coming from a society that's training human beings to be normal in a system where normal means go to work, get your paycheck, build the bombs that we need, build the factories that we need, do the things that may not feed your soul, but they provide for that illusion of forever growth that the market needs in order to feel bullish about itself. Yeah. I'm just kind of riffing here, but
I know, but I would say,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt you. I would say, we kind of have rite of passage, but I would say we kind of have like multiple rite of passages. Like, for example, one would be graduation. The other one would be earning certain amount of money.
Yeah, but that's not a rite of passage.
Yeah.
That's just a ritual of obedience. A rite of passage is constructed consciously by a culture that says, okay, you don't automatically get to be an adult in this culture. You don't automatically graduate from being an infant to toddler to child to teenager to adult. That actually it's a threshold that needs to be crossed. And our culture is going to teach you what that is. How? By putting you in a safe but dangerous moment where you have to give something up, where you have to
sacrifice something.
You have to sacrifice something. You have to face yourself, really basically face your own mortality.
Yeah.
And then when you face your own mortality, you're facing the truth of who you are, and you're connecting with that which is bigger, and that which is, again, that the dream state, that dream world of information that's there beyond the obvious. And you're getting maybe a new name, or you're getting a new responsibility, and you're leaving childhood things. We don't have that. Even in my culture, the Jewish culture, where we have a so-called rite of passage called the bar mitzvah at age 13, what is it? You memorize some foreign words, you sing them in front of a bunch of people, you get dressed up in a nice little suit, and then you get some money. and then you have a party with all your friends, including all your non-Jewish friends who could say, that was pretty interesting. That's not really, it used to be a rite of passage. Right? But that was in a different cultural context. Inside of this Western capitalist one, it's just sort of a nice ethnic event. You know what I'm saying?
It became a symbolic thing within the culture. And when I say symbolic, I mean a very narrow way of looking at the symbolic. It's
a way of symbolizing that we used to do this for real. You know what I'm saying?
Remembering it.
We're remembering that we used to do this, and that's the best we can do. We're not actually generating a cultural moment where something happens, where there's consequence.
Yeah.
So rites of passage and childbirth is also a rite of passage, that healthy cultures understand that, and so they design childbirth practices around it. We have a whole chapter, several chapters about both pregnancy and childbirth, and then the aftermath. Those are the most horrific chapters in the book, in my opinion. Just talking about how the Western medical system treats childbirth. That's the most important threshold any of us will ever cross, except for the one when we die. And we also fuck that one up too. We live in a death-phobic, death-illiterate culture that doesn't know what to do with death.
Yeah.
We don't have elders, we have elderly people. But childbirth itself is the most holy, sacred thing you can imagine, and we treat it like surgery. on which the doctor is the expert and the woman who's giving birth is the patient who needs to have this thing taken out of her, basically. And women's agency is not honored, their autonomy, their gut instincts. And this, midwives are a holdover from the time when we had practices that understood that this is a very important rite of passage, and not in some woo-woo spiritual way, developmentally, for the baby's health, for the baby's brain development. It turns out that the science accords with the wisdom of ancient cultures. Oxytocin is released when there's skin-to-skin bonding. These things are interrupted when there's unnecessary medical interventions. We're not railing against C-sections or any other of this sort of, in some cases, miraculous innovations of Western science, but they have to be context-dependent and not become a new thing of like, this is just what we do because it's easier for the hospital or for the doctor.
Yeah. So we had an addiction expert, a doctor. She's been practicing. She's been working with severe addictions for almost 30 years now, and she told us that one of the most important things in prevention of addiction is in this early childhood development, that when they were born, skin-to-skin contact. Once you don't have skin-to-skin contact, the probability of developing addiction skyrockets.
Well, and you don't have to be a traumatologist to understand why. What are addictions? They're self-soothing behaviors.
Yeah.
Any addiction, especially to like painkillers and opiates and narcotics, is about killing pain, soothing, reaching that peaceful state.
Blissful.
Womb state, connection state. What chemicals are involved in that? Endorphins. What is an endorphin? It's an endogenous morphine-like substance. That's where the word comes from. It's our brain's naturally homegrown, sustainably sourced, farm-to-table morphine. You know what I'm saying? And the way childbirth was supposed to happen, and not just the specifics of vaginal birth or whatever, but being surrounded by supportive women in the village, the mother being given a stress-free space to go through this very physically stressful thing. All of the context within context within context, and the stories and the songs and everything that creates the environment was there to safeguard that has the best chance of happening. Well, when that doesn't happen, those brain chemicals don't get the natural kickstart that they need. They don't get the stimulus package to get the, if we want to talk economics, let's talk economics.
Let's talk economics.
They don't, they don't get the incentive to be self-starters. And then we're dependent on loans for the rest of our lives. How do we get the loans? By doing outside chemicals.
Yeah.
I'll get the morphine hit from doing dope, opium or heroin. I'll get my that's the endorphin hit. I'll get my dopamine hit, my excitement, my motivation, my alertness, my attention. I'll get that from something like cocaine or amphetamine, or from sex or gambling or workaholism, or in my dad's, squalid, pitiable case, buying classical compact discs. Lord pity the workaholic doctor who has to drown his sorrows in Bartok.
Yeah, small T is a big thing in the book here. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a small A. That's a small A addiction. But exactly. So what I'm saying is that you're setting people's brains up. I mean, when nature and culture are working together, you're setting up brains that will be self-sufficient and resilient, and you're creating culture that will provide these things for people in a sustainable way. When you don't, you're messing with it. You're messing with the primal forces of nature, as Ned Beatty said in the movie Network, and you will pay.
You will pay, yeah. And then there's interest. And if
there's interest.
Yeah, there's interest.
Yep.
Talking about addiction, and taking it from the outside. And, it's interesting to say, I call it what if moment, not what if moment. When you externalize your happiness, saying, I'm not going to be happy unless or if this and that happen. It doesn't matter what happens after if, because you're always going to replace it with another if.
Right. You're making it conditional.
Yeah, you're making it conditional, But once you realize that all of those things can come from within you, then there's no more conditions.
Right. But here's the thing. You shouldn't have had to realize that in the first place, because life should have taught you that from the beginning. It should never have been a question. The only reason we think it's conditional is because it was.
Yeah.
when we came into the world, and that ain't how nature designed it. The lesson nature wants us to get is this is a world of abundance. It's certainly there's risks and dangers. We're not living in Shangri-La.
Yeah.
We have to be awake to the dangers, and we need to be resilient. But love, feeling at home in the world, feeling at home in our bodies, feeling safe to be ourselves. I might not be safe from the saber-toothed tiger, but at least I'm safe to be me, and I can trust my gut feelings about the saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah.
But if that gets in, and my brain is developing at an incredibly rapid, prolific rate early in life. I mean, human beings are born the most immature at birth, and we stay that way for the longest. A horse can run on its first day of life. I think the human brain triples in size in its first.
Yeah, it's because of the head.
It's because of the head.
It's because
because we need these big forebrains in order to use our hands and do all this stuff, but that we also need to be upright and walking, which means the pelvis has to be relatively narrow, which means we got to take pity on our poor moms at a certain point and say, okay, 9 months, you're out. But that means that the outside world has to be that extended womb, that extended term lease, that we need. But again, you're counting on the world being that. And if it's not, then we're learning that it's conditional.
Yeah, I like this extended womb.
Yeah,
I like this. Well,
no. I mean, the first 9 months of outside the womb life has been called the second 9 months of gestation.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that until I narrated my dad's book Scattered Minds last week. I did the audiobook of that and some.
Yeah, you have another book coming.
Oh, that's a second. Yeah. This was just an audiobook gig. But we're writing Hello Again, a fresh start for parents and their adult children based on our workshop of the same name. And that one, you notice how my name's a little smaller on the title of this one? That ain't going to be the case. And in fact, if we do it alphabetically, it's going to be the other way around.
Okay, let's go back to the topic. So we're actually circling back to the culture, right? Yeah. And this is the good moment to introduce also the human nature, right? That would be the third thing in the mix. So we had the myth of normal, then we had the toxic culture, and then we are introducing the human nature. What is human nature, and how do we perceive it, and how we should perceive it?
Yeah, I think I've touched on it already. I mean, look, human nature can be a trap as a concept because, again, every culture will invent a version of human nature that justifies its own self-perpetuation. Yeah. And you hear it when the way we talk about it in everyday life. Oh, it's just human nature. Yeah. But don't blame me. It's human nature, right? Yeah. So what we're wondering about human nature in the book. I don't think we rule that this is what it is. I mean, one of my favorite quotes in the book is, I forget who said it. Maybe it was Robert Sapolsky, I think, who said that our nature is not to be particularly constrained by our nature, which is to say our nature is adaptability. Yes, the more interesting question, So the more interesting question then is, what are human needs? Because if you know what human needs are, you know that if you satisfy them, you'll have maximum health and wellness and resilience and all those other good things. And if you don't, you're going to have health complications. So the needs of human beings, it is in our nature to need the following things. And again, just like you were saying earlier, we're miraculously adaptable. So can we live without them? Yes, to a certain extent. We can compromise. We can barter up this for that, and we can get through, and we can cope. We're very good at coping. But if we really want to thrive and be our maximum human selves, how do we develop? We need calm, uninterrupted, attuned contact with unstressed caregivers. That doesn't necessarily mean the birth mother and father all the time. It means caregivers, which again, it's intelligent. If you want to provide that, don't rely on too young, inexperienced people trying to make a living, working 2 jobs and raising other kids and, going to PTA meetings. Have an entire network of interlocking parenting figures who can be that net, right? But that's one essential need for our development, for our brain development in all kinds of ways, and not just brain development, but body development, because the brain and the body, again, no separation. We need to be able to experience so that's the connection part. We need that attachment relationship to be secure. We also need to become ourselves, and in order to do that, we need to have the freedom to experience all of our emotions and have our thoughts and have our feelings and not have to banish them or push them down. And we certainly need a space in which we don't have to choose between the attachment and the authenticity.
Yeah.
But on a very survival level, I have to know when I'm angry. I have to know when I'm hungry. I have to know when I have to go to the bathroom. I have to know when I'm cold. I have to know when I'm sad. I have to know when I'm happy.
Yeah, it's sorry to interrupt you, but it's surprising how many people in their mature age still do not have connection with those basic things.
Absolutely.
Many of them still don't have connection with their bodies in the most primitive, most basic ways.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And we're living in a society that can actually reward people for being disconnected from their bodies. You saw Elon Musk's announcement to his new, greatly reduced staff that, anyone who sticks around, you're going to have to buck up and put in 16-hour days, and I don't want anyone who, so basically don't go to the bathroom and whatever, but and then we'll thrive together as a company.
Yeah. Still, you also have the famous speech from Hillary Clinton when she was about about the bullying in the childhood.
Well, that's a whole other thing. That gets into the trauma of our political leaders. But the way we can get there.
Yeah.
But the way that's manifested for Hillary is she's on the basically learning to push down her vulnerability.
Yeah. Tell the story first, please.
Tell Okay, good. So, and this is not some story that my dad had to dig up. It was told on national television. It was narrated as a hero story, as a feel-good story by the voice of God himself, Morgan Freeman, as part of the Democratic National Convention when she accepted the nomination in 2016. And the story is that young Hillary, age 4, was playing in the neighborhood, was being bullied, teased by some neighborhood kids. She runs into the house in tears, runs to her mother for comfort and support. And the mother says, you go back out there. There's no room for cowards in this house. You get out there and you figure out how to deal with those kids. And this is cited as an example of resilience building. And no one questioned it. Everyone was just like, wow, isn't that inspiring? What a girl boss. What an inspiring leader. Well, it's pathetic in the true meaning of the word. It's pathos. It's deeply tragic and sad. And then who does she become later in life? 60 years later, she's on the campaign trail with pneumonia in the middle of the summer, doesn't tell anybody until she collapses. She faints on the street in New York. And even then she says, I'm fine, I'm great. It's a beautiful day in New York. Now, half the country can see through that inauthenticity, and it makes their skin crawl. It also makes their skin crawl that she calls them baskets of deplorables. But her half thinks that's, wow, isn't that inspiring? She doesn't let anything stop her, And so we're living in a culture that doesn't just normalize that kind of self-suppression, but it lionizes it. It raises it to the level of, celebrates it, makes it a virtue.
That was an eye-opener thing for me also when talking about trauma here, because, on one hand, the drawbacks, the coping mechanisms that takes you to, illnesses, to, depression, to addiction, it's something somewhat expected, but once you start talking about the trauma in popular culture, in politics, with successful people, the way we celebrate the coping mechanisms from early childhood traumas, that's amazing one. And also the amazing one that I've kind of recognized myself in it was, when trauma happens to you and then you don't let it express itself in any way possible, so you feel like it hasn't touched you in a way, and therefore you learn how to not be touched by trauma in the future, and you say, oh, it doesn't affect me. But the fact that it doesn't affect you is the way it affected you.
That's exactly right.
That was kind of, conundrum that I was flabbergasted when I heard that. And then I realized, projected to my own life, and I was like, God damn, that's so true.
Well, and that requires a reconfiguration of our understanding of the word trauma, which we sort of skipped over, but it's very crucial, because trauma, we usually think of trauma as bad events. So you're like Serb and Somali, so I could, I could assume that there's been big T traumatic events in your family history. Your people have seen some shit.
A lot of it, yeah.
You know? And maybe you have yourself. My father went through a capital T trauma. I went through a capital T trauma when my dad would yell at me, like scream at me like I'm a crazy person and hit me across the face once, you know, in front of the entire family. That's a big T trauma, I'd say. You know, it's not a genocide, but it's to a child, it's terrifying.
You know, the worst thing that happens to you is the worst thing that happens to you.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly. But that's not the definition of trauma. That is an event that can potentiate trauma. A trauma is a wound, not an event. So trauma is the effect that lasts. So in American football, the trauma is not the illegal hit to the head, it's the concussion, because that's what lasts. So it's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. Well, in the light of that, there's more than one way to wound somebody. You can wound them by having something bad that shouldn't have happened happen. You can also wound them by something good that needed to happen or should have happened not happen. And one of the good things, again, now we're getting back to the human needs from your previous question, one of the not just good but mandatory things that we need in order to be ourselves is to feel all of our emotions. But what if I didn't learn that I could? What if I learned, in fact, that it was dangerous to feel all my emotions? Because the minute I start feeling angry, daddy flips out or mommy shuts off emotionally. Or in my case, I think there were aspects of my joy that were unacceptable to my parents. They were too much. You know, the ways that I would seek for approval and attention, and when it was coming from my anxiety, that was also, I experienced it as rejected or rebuffed, let's say. Well, so now the good thing that needed to happen, which is I needed the world I was born into to say, Daniel, welcome, all of you is welcome. And you'll sort out for yourself later which parts you want to foreground and put on the back burner, you know. But for now, as a little toddler, you know, have at it. And we will guide your behavior so that you're not putting your hands on hot coals and running out into the street. It's not like there's no boundaries, but in terms of acceptability, in terms of welcome, you are welcome just as you are. We need that. But if that doesn't happen, and again, you don't need a father slapping you across the face or a world war to get the message, oh, mommy and daddy love me, but that kind of turns off when I get like this. Okay, well, I'm not going to go there. Okay, well, now what's the best way I can cope with that? I'm going to get cut off from that. I'm not going to let it affect me. When things affect me, when I show that things affect me, that's when the hammer really comes down. So I'm just not going to let things affect me. So now it doesn't affect me. But exactly as you said, that is exactly where it affected me.
It's like a car accident. It's not an impact. It's about the injury that impact creates within your body that stays. You know, the accident is what happened at that precise moment.
That's right.
The injury is what you carry with yourself over time,
That's right?
So the trauma is actually that the way your body reacted in the moment of a traumatic experience. And there's also a couple of things that I think we need to clear up when it comes to trauma, and when we talk about analogies. The one analogy I really liked in the book is open wound and scar tissue. Yeah.
So when you sustain a wound, see if I can remember this one, because it is a good one. That, you know, if the wound remains open, it'll be exquisitely sensitive to the touch, and anytime you get near it, you know, and it's also very likely to become infected if it stays open, right? Yeah. You'd have to keep everything away from it, and you'd constantly have to be changing the bandage and all that kind of stuff. It takes a lot of upkeep, and the body wants to heal that wound. The other option, if it's a deep enough cut, is that, you know, the better option really is to create scar tissue. A scar seals the wound, and it replaces it with a layer of dead skin, basically, which can't feel, and it's numb, and nothing new can grow there. Well, that's preferable than having an open sore, but it has a cost. And many of if we want to know where our traumas are, it leads back to what you were talking about, that thing, I'm not connected to myself. Well, that very spot of not being connected to yourself, what if that's scar tissue?
Yeah.
That's that numb spot, that dead spot. So it could be in the world of your sex drive. It could be in the world of your social life. It could be in the world of your self-confidence. It could be in the world of your self-esteem or trust in your gut feelings or your ideas. It could be in the realm of, this emotion or that emotion that you're not comfortable feeling or don't even think you have. So people say, I never get angry.
Yeah.
Well, you weren't born that way. So what happened to it? It's the case of the disappearing core emotion.
Yeah.
None of us are born disconnected from any part of ourselves. We make these compromises throughout life.
Yeah.
And those then end up as personality traits we might think of as strengths, just like Hillary Clinton and her whole campaign team thought of her resilience, quote unquote, as a strength, when in fact it was it may be a strength, but it was built on top of a terrible wound, a terrible scar, which is to say, never trust anybody. You are all alone. No one is going to be here for you. The world is a cold, unforgiving place. The best thing you can do is to beat them at their own game.
Yeah. And that's the way we create narratives, that we start believing in them, and those narratives become our reality.
And those are our ideologies.
And those are our ideologies, and then they truly become reality, because the way we perceive the world that we're living in is the way the world is in our realities.
Who's that who said that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are?
Who's that?
I don't know.
Oh, can't remember.
But I like the quote.
Yeah. And also, there's also we know the big T traumas, and then there's also small T traumas.
Yeah.
What are those?
Well, so as I mentioned, the big T traumas are the bad things that happened. The small T traumas are the wounds left from the good things that didn't happen. So if I just take my own childhood for an example, because I think my dad only talks about his big T traumas.
Yeah.
His childhood story is my mom had to give me to a stranger on the street to save my life from the Nazis. Okay, well, you win, Dad. Not all of us have Nazis in our past. Okay, fine. So I had a father who raged at me and who hit me once. So he got angry enough to once physically hit me, and the rest of the time to make me afraid that he would.
Yeah.
The hitting only happened once, but the force of that was not different than the other times in terms of the emotions. So I got shocks to my nervous system far beyond what any young creature can actually handle healthily and know what to do with. But the small T trauma was that I was constantly living not knowing when the next thing was going to happen. So I never got to rest. That's chronic. That's not an event. I can't remember that because it was just the normal. The small T was absorbing the message, which my parents have repeated in words, and when they recall what it was like for them to have me as their first child, that I was just more than they knew what to do with. They were not expecting such an intense child, which anyone could have, looking at the two of them, anyone could have said, you're going to have an intense child because you two, you're pretty intense. But somehow they were expecting a version of me that was going to be easier for them to handle than the, I guess, intensely unique and insisting on being itself little creature that they gave birth to and didn't conform to their fantasies of who I was going to be. And they've talked about how difficult it was to handle my overpowering energy. In other words, here I am, this little creature who needs them, and they feel like I'm overpowering them. Well, what message am I going to absorb? I'm too much. There's something wrong with me. And whatever that does inside of me is a small T trauma.
Yeah.
Because I didn't get to rest comfortably in being myself is fully okay here. Parts of me are okay, and parts of me are okay here. In fact, parts of me are super okay here. So when I'm clever and funny and make jokes that they like, then everything's A-okay. Or when I'm sweet and nice. But when I'm like this, I'm not. So now we talked about the need of having full access to all of our repertoire of personality qualities and emotions. Now I'm picking and choosing. I'm curating my personality to be acceptable to the people that I absolutely depend upon for my very existence. That's a small T trauma. Yeah. And in a way, I don't envy people with the big T traumas because I wouldn't want to be walking around with like the kinds of, complex PTSD that end up in the nervous system from rape or genocide or my it's like
Continue.
Yeah. I'm dropping such truths that your phone is it's a phone drop. It's just like
keeps dropping.
It just keeps jumping up like, whoa, what did he say? So I'm not, it's not better or worse, but in some ways, if something bad like that happened to you, it's easier to follow the trail of crumbs back to find out what it was, and or you're already going to remember. You know that happened. My dad knows that he was a Holocaust survivor. It's not a surprise. For those of us who are carrying these sort of scars of these invisible wounds that don't seem like wounds because they were just, it wasn't a bad childhood. And for some people, it's even harder than a family like mine because it didn't even seem like a stressful family. Some people grow up in perfectly pleasant homes where it's not dramatic. But they had these quiet moments of being alone with their pain because they couldn't show all of it. You know what I'm saying? And that's the stuff that gets invisibilized. And that takes some living and some listening to oneself to know, oh, wait a minute, there's something there that isn't quite lining up.
Yeah.
And so I don't think any of us have an easy time of it on the healing path, because for those of us with the more subtle, small t traumas, it can take a while to realize that they're even there.
Yeah, and there's also, beside the possibilities, the missed possibilities for good things to happen, which leaves this empty space in which the negative consequences can grow. There's also this thing that comes from the society, from within, the limitations of the society and acquirements from the society. And when people perceive you or your family from outside, there is a difficulty for you to connect with them with your small t traumas, because in many different cases they're gonna perceive you as a privileged child, or someone who was blessed to have this or that type of growing childhood, and socioeconomic circumstances that you were brought up, and therefore there's no sympathy for you, there's no empathy for you.
Yeah, I mean, and imagine my particular case. So I've got a world full of human beings looking at me. I mean, I get messages like this quite frequently. Oh my God, your father speaks so honestly and courageously about the ways in which he mistreated you as a child. I would love to have a father who was that honest and that courageous to admit his faults. Well, on one level, absolutely. I am very fortunate to have a father, to be in a family where there's a language to talk about that. But you can hear the trap in that, right?
Yeah.
Because now that my dad admits it publicly, now I don't get to be pissed off about it or something, It
doesn't mean that the issue was resolved.
It doesn't, and it doesn't mean that other people's perceptions of what it means that he admits it.
Yeah.
Like, people aren't seeing the whole picture, and they're hearing this, and people listening to this interview are hearing it through my lens. But the fact is that we all experience our childhoods as ourselves. And trauma, again, it's not the facts of what happened. It was how you experienced it, how you interpreted it, what you made it mean about yourself.
Yeah, what made one of the biggest obstacles for me, and I think for a lot of people also, is that you do not measure emotions with the units of intelligence, in the units of knowing. The fact that I know something, it doesn't mean that it's going to change the way I feel about it.
I realized something very disturbing recently, but kind of revolutionary for me. It's kind of a life-changing insight. I've always thought I'm very emotionally intelligent. My parents always told me I was highly emotionally intelligent. I've had friends tell me I'm emotionally intelligent. I've told myself I'm emotionally intelligent. After a certain number of failed relationships with women, I've realized I'm not emotionally intelligent at all. I'm intelligent about emotions. I'm emotionally stupid.
Yeah.
Which is to say that when the emotion is actually happening, I can't keep my bearings. I can't stick to my values. I can't stick to my intentions. I'm completely taken over, and I don't know what's going on, and I don't know what energy is coming out of my own mouth. And I don't know what's making me choose the people I'm choosing or reject the people I'm rejecting. And it's all happening in the back. And meanwhile, I'm talking very intelligently in like psychologically advanced language about it. I'm explaining to the person why it is that that's not emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is the ability to say, wow, I'm confused. Wow, you just said I love you and I'm terrified. Wow, we just had great sex and my body is shutting down, as opposed to just acting it out.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course. Ask me about opinion and I'm going to excel.
Oh, yeah.
But ask me how I feel. We have a problem there.
I think, as we say somewhere in the book, the mind, the ego, is a tenured expert on the subject of itself.
Yeah.
And so healing, to get to the final piece of the subtitle, which I hope we're going to talk about in this interview.
We are, but there's 2-3 things that I want to mention before that.
Sure, but I'll just say that healing is not a matter of gathering more self-knowledge or self-awareness. It's about self-retrieval. It's not about adding more facts to the woodpile of knowledge.
Yeah. This is the food coming in.
I like that.
Yeah. So please, let's continue. What I was trying to steer the conversation into the segue, right, into this topic of in the way environment creates trauma and the way we respond to trauma within the certain guidelines of the environment that we are living in. It's very interesting to see, and there's the moment where generational trauma kicks in, right? There's the moment where we see there's where the critique coming from, saying that it's ideology. When you're saying about the way we can correlate for example, autoimmune disease with race, with class, the economic status of the people, the way with women in society, the way we see, for example, in as you stated, I think in the book here it says that at the end of the 19th century, the number of people gender-wise who were diagnosed with MS was one for one woman there was one man, and today we have for each man diagnosed with MS it's 6 women.
Yeah.
So what happened?
Yeah.
For example, when we talk about autoimmune disease within indigenous community, we have the skyrocketing statistics when it comes to indigenous women. When we talk about
diseases that didn't exist on the North American continent.
Diseases that didn't exist on the North American continent, which is and then when we talk about the differences between women of color and other ones, then we have also a discrepancy when it comes to statistics. Can you please elaborate on that?
Well, to me, I mean, this is. The term intersectionality has become a bit of a cultural hot potato. Yeah. At least, but this is where intersections really meet the road. Like, this is where the rubber meets the road. People at these intersecting lines of lineage and identity and position in society are carrying different payloads of, culturally inherited trauma. If you're a black woman in the United States, you're the inheritor of the legacy of slavery and also the legacy of misogyny, and the way that those two things have clashed and collaborated over time. Indigenous Canadians or Native Americans are the inheritors of a legacy of forced dispossession and extermination and the destruction of culture. So not just killing, not just taking of land, but the actual active, deliberate destruction of an entire cosmology, an entire way of life, entire way of being connected to oneself, to one's community, to the land, language, being forcibly, there's a story that's told in the book about, a young girl my dad met who, was a teenager growing up in a residential school run by the state and the Catholic Church. Right around the time he moved to Canada as a teenager, he meets her many years later He tells her this. She tells him the story that when she got taken, these kids were kidnapped from their homes and taken to these schools. Her first day in school, the nun caught her speaking her native language and made her put a pin through her tongue as punishment. And so she couldn't close her mouth for an entire hour for fear of cutting her lips. That's how they taught them what the new normal was. Mm. So, and then these people are then having kids under conditions of economic privation and, resource inequality and all kinds of stuff, passing on multi-generational trauma. And yeah, we're seeing all kinds of, I don't have the statistics. I'm not conversant in them the way my father is. They're all in the book. It's not that one thing causes the other. Like you read some of the angry Amazon comments from people who don't like that we're making socio-political statements. Like some people, look, I think there's a critique to be made that guilting people and telling people they have white privilege and all this stuff has its limitations. You can make that critique that maybe woke culture has its excesses. But I'm sorry, if you don't want to hear the simple fact that black people have a higher rate of this disease or that disease, or that slavery was a 400-year institution, or that the dispossession of indigenous people has had a massive, catastrophic, horrific impact on people's health, then you're just trying to stay asleep.
Yeah.
You're just so inured against you're so defended against your own sense of guilt that whenever anyone else points out a simple fact, you're like, stop guilting me. Well, no, they're not guilting you. They're just telling you what happened. And you don't have to take it personally. But there is a sense of collective responsibility we would all have to take if we realized these normalized class differences, the fact that it's normal that there are these things called reservations that when I drive across North America, I'm driving through them and that's where the native people live. Mm-hmm. These things became normal through lots of blood.
Yeah.
These things became normal through lots of pain and death and rape and horrific things. This is a horrific normal, and it has horrific consequences. And anytime some of us would rather not see it, we're just trying to push away our own empathy and compassion and pain. And so it is a very striking and shocking thing to see the statistics of disease, illness, also suicide, mental illness, addiction in these communities, because it just it couldn't be more stark in terms of this is what happens. This is us fucking around and finding out on a grand scale at the expense of particular groups, which is not to say that white people don't suffer. There's all kinds of trauma in white communities, especially poor white communities, but even rich white communities. It's just that they're carried differently by different groups along different lines of historical, lineage. And there's no one has to be to blame in order for us to just sit down and take a look and say, well, what have these people been through? And what impact has that had on them? And as far as Jews go, some people wonder, well, why is it if Jews have been so oppressed, why don't we have these kinds of specific chronic health issues? Well, the Holocaust happened over a 5-year period. And it was a terrible extermination, but it wasn't a centuries-long attack on an entire culture and an attempt to wipe out a language. It was it was the most extreme case of group extermination, like literal trying to kill off of people in a short period of time ever. But that affected one generation and the generation below it and the generation above it. When we talk about these groups that have been enslaved or dispossessed in North America, for instance, we're talking about generation after generation after generation, just absolute destruction of the entire family system. And it's a testament to the human spirit and to the strength of the cultures that were there to begin with, and the cultures that developed in the face of it, and those cultures of resistance and resilience, that these people are even alive and sane.
Therefore, the myth of normal.
Exactly.
Yeah. Therefore.
And you said you've only been through what each people has been through, what each people has been through, and we're all carrying it in different ways.
Yeah, and one also fascinating thing before we jump way across, to the healing process, right? For the end of the conversation is the telomeres. Is that the fascinating thing about telomeres? We heard about, whoever is interested heard about telomeres mostly, probably only within the context of longevity, the context of
I'd never heard about them until I wrote this book.
I heard of them in a couple of different conversations within the context of longevity.
Right.
The telomeres, the shorter the telomeres, the shorter the life cycle of a human is, the longer the telomeres. And, the studies have shown that we have certain number of telomeres when we were born. We lose them over years. So, when you measure them, you see...
Yeah, they're markers of biological age.
They are markers of biological
Not chronological age.
Yeah, biological age, and and they get shortened over time.
Yep.
Right? They're all markers of biological age.
Yeah.
But when we talk about biological age, there's also the connection in between telomeres and stress.
Yes.
Which produce all of the consequences that we were telling about. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Again, this is the kind of stuff that my father would be much more conversant in, but I can, again, it might just be my fatigue right now, but I know that telomeres are like a sheath, like one of those plastic coatings on a shoelace that keeps the shoelace together around the chromosomes. And that, like you explained it beautifully, that they're a chromosome structure where when we're born, they're at their relatively longest, and then as we get older, they get shorter and shorter, and the quicker they shorten is a marker of biological aging, and that stress ages them. And we talk this way, right? He aged 40 years overnight when something stressful happens. His hair went white after his son was born. Our bodies keep the score, as Bessel van der Kolk's book says. And so telomeres are just one example. Now, what I think what's fascinating in the chapter in which we cite it, I think it's called Dispatches from the New Biology. We're just using that as sort of a fascinating example where there are researchers who have looked at the length of telomeres among people of different ethnic groups and whatever. And this one researcher says, within one city, you look at someone's telomeres, you can tell what zip code they grew up in.
Wow.
What neighborhood, basically. The whole point is not the telomeres per se, but it's that our bodies are absolutely faithful record keepers of the lives we've lived. Mm-hmm. And so our health, in other words, is a consequence of our emotional history. It's an expression of our emotional history, which points the way to healing, because if we can change the trajectory of our emotional destiny, if we can start to address some of the needs that haven't been met, or at least start treating ourselves with a little more kindness and understand how we got to be this way, the body will always respond to the environment. It's not set in stone just because we got set in a certain direction early in life. We're very, like we said, we're an adaptable creatures. We're very plastic. And there's brain plasticity all the way into the end of life.
Yeah. Then
I'm sorry I can't be more detailed about the telomeres.
No problem.
You want the hard science stuff? Call Dr. Mate.
The thing now we're now introducing psilocybin back in the conversation when we talk about neuroplasticity.
I need to start. I think I'm on a microdose with that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, but it's really difficult, to find steady. To always have the same psilocybin or whatever, it's the same type of mushroom, the same quality.
I imagine here it's especially difficult.
Yeah, same quality of them, same potential of it.
Yeah, I mean, where I'm from, Vancouver, that literally you walk down the street, there are advertisements for
here it's
psilocybin emporiums, like delivery services, like it's become a...
Really?
Oh, yeah. And I have a friend in California who has sourced some really good ones. I'm not sure what it's like on the East Coast where I live now in New York, but yeah, no, I feel like, because I have a very manageable kind of ADD that I kind of like, but if I'm honest, I could use something to, well, anyway, Doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
I know a couple of people who tried microdosing, but I wouldn't call that microdosing at all.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to get high. Like I said, I married into the ayahuasca world,
Yeah.
and psychedelics I've done enough consciousness altering for now.
Yeah.
What I really enjoy these days is altering my mindset, not my consciousness, in real time, in my ordinary state of consciousness, connecting the dots in real time and saying, oh, wait a minute, okay, I can actually retire that old paradigm, shifting it in a way that's connecting the cognitive and the emotional,
Yeah.
and letting the spiritual catch up to it, but without having to go into some altered state. To me, that's just added. It's just it's not as reliable for me as really just learning in the course of life. And like you said, it's a very powerful modality that I wouldn't unrecommend to anyone, but I wouldn't say, oh, everyone needs it. Anyway, now we're talking about psychedelics. We're totally gotten off course.
Yeah, but this is a good segue actually to a healing process.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, to a healing process, and to talk about, let's start with a myth in a positive way.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and this someone would say, ironically, but it's not really. Your father, Dr. Gabor, Dr. Mate, he actually said that the most satisfying people he met was people who resolved their issues in the palliative care, in the face of death.
Yeah.
And this connects us also with the rite of passage that we were talking about. There is something when you're facing death, when you're facing, the end of the whole identity that we have created and understood our worlds and ourselves in, that there is something, in it that, awakens something in us.
It can.
It can, yeah. It doesn't mean it's going to.
Not every movie ends that way.
Yeah. But let's talk about the healing process.
Yeah. Well, since you brought up myth in the positive sense, so if we get rid of this modern meaning of myth, in which which you're using it in the title here, because that's an unspoken myth. But think of spoken myths, myths that are myths on purpose, for a purpose. See, the nature of the kind of myth we're talking about in this title is it's an invisible myth, one that we think is true. But what about, the myth of the creation story that every culture has? That is a self-created story. They know it's a story. Whether they believe it or they just tell it, they know it's a culturally generated way. It's a framework to look at a great mystery through and to make sense of something.
Yeah.
And if you think of any great myth in any tradition, it involves archetypes, it involves connections between things, between human beings and nature. Whether it's like African stories of how the leopard got his spots, or how the sun came to be in the sky, or the moon, or making sense of the world around us and our place in it. Myth places us in that context. It helps us understand ourselves as connected. Now, whether or not the content of the myths is accurate, these myths are true in the sense that they true us up with the way life is. It doesn't matter if the facts are accurate. Being accurate and being true are two very different things. Our culture confuses truth with accuracy. We love being accurate, but truth is what's harmonic and harmonized with the way life is. It rings true, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not so you can go see a piece of fiction. King Lear is a true story, even if it didn't happen.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? That's what art is for. That's, Western art is our version of myth. So you look at any good story, what is involved? It involves, some universal themes of connection. And it has something to tell us about healing. One of the great distinctions that I've heard made by a great proponent of myth in the best sense, Michael Meade, who's got a wonderful podcast called Living Myth. We quote him in the book. We interviewed him. He has a book called Fate and Destiny. And that, the Greeks understood this, right? Tragic fate. The fates, the three sisters of fate who decide where we're going to be born, essentially, like the circumstances into which we're born. We can't do anything about our fate. Yeah. But our destiny is the thread the twist of the fate that leads to the thread of destiny that pulls us towards a destination of where we're heading, where we're meant to be, possibility. That's a story of healing, because we start from circumstances we didn't choose and hardships we weren't able to fully survive intact. And then the hero's journey takes us towards a wholer version of ourselves. And what is healing but becoming more whole, moving towards wholeness. That's what healing means. So even the idea of healing itself is a kind of mythic understanding of what's possible for human beings. Because without healing, all you have is cure. Did the symptoms go away? Well, are you better now? Well, do I still have bipolar tendencies? Yes, I do. But my understanding of myself is so much different than it used to be before I realized that I experience myself as so much more whole, and that now these two sides of me, there's someone in between watching them, observing. I don't identify with the lows. I don't identify with the highs. When I'm in one, I know I'm in one. Now, it so happens that a medication is helping that right now. But if I just took the medication without understanding of where did this so-called condition or diagnosis come from in my childhood, where did it fracture me from myself? What does it represent? What are the gifts of it? What are the wounds of it? And where is it leading me towards a more integrated version of myself? Then it would just be a pill.
Yeah.
But actually, it's part of a larger story for me now of being able, you know what I said, one of my earliest small T traumas is my parents not being able to embrace all of the contradictions of me. They wanted me to be one way or the other. Well, my journey in life is to embrace all the contradictions of me.
Yeah.
And to be able to contain and be the container, not the contents, the container. Well, you can already hear that there's something poetic about that, right?
Yeah.
We're each walking our own hero poem, you know? And art is, and I'm a lyricist, you know? So what do I do as a lyricist? Well, I rhyme fundamentally. That's one, I love to rhyme. What is rhyming? It's creating sonic connections between disparate, thoughts. I can connect the word love and the word shove in your mind just by pointing out that they sound the same. They mean very different things, but that's a powerful juxtaposition, right?
Yeah.
Finding these connections, and painters do it by virtue of color matching and shading and every different kind of art form has its different techniques. What's that? Jackson Pollock, even him, right?
Yeah.
Seeming chaos, but there's something, there's an organizing principle there. So all of this is to say that I think for me, the story I tell of human beings, the big myth that I believe in, and it's not that I believe in it, I just think it works for me, so I go with it, is that healing wants to happen. It's not personal. Healing is wanting to happen through us anyway. Like, we are basically just healing engines. And so what needs to happen in order for the universe to heal itself? Well, we have to get a little bit broken along the way.
Yeah.
So that we can, which means I don't need to heal myself, and I certainly can't heal you, goddammit. I mean, I can't heal anyone else.
Yeah.
But I can't heal myself. What can I do? I can get on board the healing river. I can figure out which direction the river wants to flow in, and I can ask, what does it want from me? What's required? What might I have to give up if I wanted to participate in the healing in me that's already happening? If I wanted to stop resisting it? What logs on the side of the river would I have to let go of clinging to so that I can float down? What whirlpools, what scary parts of the river might I have to be a little brave to go through? What's on the other side of that? And what am I flowing towards? I'm flowing towards this, hopefully this ocean where I'm reunited with where I actually come from. No, I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along.
Yeah.
But it's a very different way of looking at ourselves than, say, self-improvement or even personal growth. Like, I'm a project and I'm going to I'm going to tend to myself like a garden. I'm going to see what grows. So the minute, and the fact is that every healthy culture in history has had healing stories and healing practices. And in fact, they're medicine men. A shaman is literally a medicine man. there's my stomach again. We're deeply steeped and are deeply steeped in mythic thinking. These shamans that you're talking about connected. What is the dream state if not the place where myth lives? It's the source of the mythic imagination. Well, that's what the doctors were skilled in.
Yeah.
If you want to be a good medicine man, a good medicine woman, be a good storyteller, a good dream weaver, right? Now, our society has divorced those two things and thinks that healers are just people who can manipulate the physical aspects of the body and brain. Well, no wonder we're seeing the health crises we're having. So full-on healing means embracing that we're part of something bigger. That's my that's my little TED talk about myth, because I love that topic. Then in terms of what we say in the book about healing, there's principles of healing. There's like 4 A's of healing.
There's a 5th one.
In fact, there's a 6th one. In fact, there's even a 7th one that we didn't include, which is awareness. My uncle pointed that out to my dad. It's true, because that's the big one. You
Activism and awareness, that would be 5th and 6th, right?
No, activism and advocacy were the 5th and 6th. The 7th would be awareness. But really it should be the first, because without awareness, you can't be aware that you're angry. That's one of them, healthy anger, acceptance, agency, and autonomy.
Yeah.
Or authenticity. I mean, there's so many, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe the 8th is alcohol. No, I'm kidding. But even that, saying that there are 7 A's of healing, well, that's a mythic framework, right?
Yeah.
There are 5 compassions that we outline. There are practices people can do to get more in touch with what their body is telling them about where healing isn't.
Yeah.
Noticing where authenticity is missing and the impact on our bodies. Cultivating that awareness so that it gets less and less normalized to ignore it.
Mm.
Healing, actually, once you get familiar with it, it's a very rich and creative space. Because again, it is that secret chord that is caught. Like when you get on that, I think healing, true healing, is a process that you can actually, in the end, you can love that process. Now, there's going to be pain along the way for a lot of people. It's not going to be fun at first. It's not always going to be fun. But if you can stand inside of the larger picture of where am I coming from and what am I reuniting, what am I reconnecting with, what's this for? And not just for me, what's this for my family? Yeah. Why am I healing? I did a mental chiropractic walk with somebody who was just sick and tired of healing. That's why she contacted me. She's like, my therapist keeps sending me book after book. I've done EMDR, EFT, I've done family systems therapy, I've done family constellation therapy, I just ordered all this new yoga equipment. I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed. I said, okay, well, so
let's go for a walk.
Let's go for a walk. And I said, what's your intention? And she finally said, I would just love it to be easy, but I know it's not easy. I said, no, that's good. How about ease? Why not have some ease in your healing journey? She's like, oh, well, but I was so severely traumatized. I said, I know you were severely traumatized. I get that. Are you tired of having the healing being torture? She said, yeah. I said, okay, well, why don't we just see what's possible, And by the end of it, she realized that all of the pushing herself to read every single book and do every single approach and buy every single piece she said, oh my God, that's not healing my trauma, that's repeating my trauma.
Yeah.
That's not where ease is. So we made ease the intention. Or maybe it was lightness. I think it was actually lightness. I said, well, what if we made lightness more important than anything else? Is the way you've been approaching it compatible with that? Absolutely not. Well, she wrote to me a few weeks later. She said, I put the yoga equipment away. I haven't read a single one of those books. I've been reading novels. I've been going for walks more, which I hadn't been doing. I haven't been taking the healing thing so damn seriously, and I can feel the actual healing happening.
The actual healing happening. And this is, I think, the most important thing for everyone troubled in any way, to know that healing is possible.
Yeah.
It is always a possibility.
That's right.
It doesn't matter where you're at this moment.
As long as you understand what it means, it's not a destination. At best, it's a direction. Mm-hmm. It's a movement. It's not a stopping point.
Yeah.
It's moving towards wholeness, whatever that looks like at the time, which might mean not doing yoga for a while. It's all context. It all depends on the context.
Yeah.
But it's not rigid discipline and I have to do this and I must heal myself. That sounds a lot like your stressful childhood to
Yeah,
me.
stressful childhood and
You know?
maybe a new trauma coming in.
That's
you know?
right. And if
Right.
And for this woman, she had a strong no rising up in her, but it was so verboten.
Yeah.
It wasn't allowed to be said until I allowed her to say it. I was like, your body is clearly saying, fuck this. I don't, you know.
Yeah.
And just allowing herself to say that was the healing. So healing, you never know what it's going to look like. And here's another great thing about myths and stories is that things come in disguises.
Yeah.
You know, Gandalf shows up as a ratty old, you know,
Gandalf the Grey becoming Gandalf the White.
Exactly, right? Sometimes things have to show up in a disguise so that we'll
Metamorphosis.
so that we won't kick metamorphosis, exactly. So that we won't kick them to the curb, because we wouldn't if a wizard showed up, I'd be like, get out of here. I'm just trying to enjoy my hobbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, well this
Life shows, like my healing in the form of my marriage, for instance.
Yeah.
That was a disaster in my life, Caleb. That was a that was a catastrophe. I can't even tell you. Someday I will. The story, and I'm not maligning this individual. It was the event, the whole story of it was a disaster of how it all went down. But it needed to be that way. It had to come in that particular form, because anything else wouldn't have gotten my attention, wouldn't have got me fully on board. Mm-hmm. It's like it got me in the spaceship, and then it zoomed me through the wormhole to the other side. And I'm so much happier on the other side of it. And I had to go through some shit.
Yeah, of course. And this is really getting us back, circling back to the beginning of the conversation, when, you know, as a how you said it, mental chiropractician, you know, you specialize in walks.
Yeah.
But in order for those people to take a walk, they have to take the leap of faith first. They have to be open for it.
They do. But I try to keep the door, the on-ramp not very steep.
Yeah.
I don't say you have to take a leap of faith. I say, here are the conditions. It's very simple. It's very specific and it's rigorous, and I stick to it. But it's actually not that daunting, I think. I say there's 3 things that are required. Number 1, you have to be able to say, look me in the face, look yourself in the face and say, I'm stuck.
Yeah.
Something is stuck. All that means is everything I know isn't helping me. And something is irritating me about it. I don't like it. I'm sick and tired of it. It might be acute, it might be chronic, it might be severe, it might be mild. It might just be a feeling of,
Yeah.
But all of my knowledge and all of my self-knowledge and my self-awareness and all the books I've read and all the yoga I've done, it's not helping. I'm stuck. Okay, number 1. Number 2, I have to be willing to get unstuck. Willing. Or at least open to the possibility. I don't require that someone be like, yes. I just have to ask them, are you willing? Because here's the thing. When we're stuck, and this includes being stuck in our traumas, being stuck in our addictions, being stuck in our mental health patterns, even being stuck in our physical diseases.
Yeah.
I think there's a part of us that is perfectly comfortable staying there.
Yeah.
You're not suffering so much that you need to get out of it.
Yeah.
You'll be fine. I mean, maybe it'll kill you, but we're all going to die someday. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you're kind of making a peace with it in a wrong way. Completely wrong way.
Well, I don't know if it's wrong.
And
Look,
getting comfortable with it.
your coping mechanisms are just that. They help you cope. They helped you survive your childhood. They've gotten you this far. You don't have to change. You really don't have to heal. You don't. No one's going to force you, and you don't have to get unstuck. So then the question is, do I want to, or at least am I willing to? Yeah. Am I willing to have a choice? Because being stuck means I don't have a choice. I theoretically have a choice. I know I should have a choice, but I don't really have a choice.
You have an excuse.
You have an excuse, right? So then I ask them, would you like to see another option at the end of which you can make a conscious choice whether you want to stay stuck or not? That's number 2. They have to say yes to that. Number 3, are you willing to consider the possibility, in fact, the probability, in fact, the certainty, but let's call it the possibility.
Or the probability.
That your stuckness is not a function of your circumstances, but of your view of your circumstances. It's not the circumstances that are keeping you stuck. It's the way you're looking at them and the way that you're looking at yourself. All of which, of course, is connected to your trauma, but we don't need to go there. Again, like I said,
there's a chapter about it.
You know, I'm traumatized, you're traumatized, we all scream for ice cream.
It's the last place we want to be.
The last place we want to be, and we're all there. I just take it for granted, right? And sometimes I touch on it with people, but only to say, hey, look, you come by this honestly. It's not an accident that you're struggling with this. But the point is given that trauma was not what happened to you, it's what happened inside of you, what's keeping you stuck right now, what has you be stuck right now is not what's happening outside of you, it's what's happening inside of you about what's happening outside of you. Okay. So are you willing to take a walk with me, admitting that you're stuck, willing to be unstuck, and willing to look at it from a forensic perspective of what is it about my perspective that's keeping me stuck? If those three conditions are met, it's guaranteed.
It's something. Yeah, it's something. It's something. Well, that's how I started my therapy. At the first session, when we were getting to know each other.
Yeah.
You know, and when I got the question, why am I here for? Or, I forgot what the question was, but it was something along the way. And I said, I have no idea. I just know I feel like shit. I just know I do not feel good.
Yeah.
I have no idea why. I have no idea what's going on. I know nothing. I can give you zero context.
And for therapy, that's a perfectly good way to start.
Yeah.
The reason that mine is a little bit more rigorous is that, unlike a therapist, I'm not trying to see you next week. I'm not opening a process.
Yeah.
This is not a healing journey we're on. We're going to take a walk.
Yeah.
A walk. Today's the day, buddy. And of course, you can come back later. You can come back a few weeks from now when you have bigger, better problems.
Yeah.
But we're going to I want the person to go into it with the attitude of, okay, there's therapy, there's the long-term healing process, and then there's this thing that I just want to get unstuck from, whether I'm healed or not.
Yeah.
And that takes a degree of what? Intention, which is to say, my intention, no matter what, is that I see something new. Now, if you set that intention, I don't care where you are in the healing journey. This woman is very far away from being fully healed, but she had a powerful breakthrough on that walk. Why? Because I invited her and she stepped up courageously to set a very powerful intention of lightness. Damn it, I want some lightness no matter what. Even if I never heal another trauma in my life, I want to have some lightness about it. And that itself, of course, is healing. So I need more buy-in from people when we start than a therapist does. A therapist just needs you to be open to say, I'm not happy and I don't know why. That's fine. For me, if I'm going to do what I do best, which is not to sit and listen for weeks, but it's to have or months or years, which would be in my bottom line interest, but I'm not trained to do it and it wouldn't be authentic. Every single one of these walks is electric and fun because something's going to happen right now. What is it? And we're improvising and we're playing and people are giving me full license to be as emphatic as, you can tell the way I speak. I like to, it's like this level or I'm asleep, So it's just, it is its own thing. But that for me is an example of knowing what is aligned for me and what is not aligned for me. And let other people do the other thing that's aligned for them.
Okay. And there's so many things that we could talk about, but all of those things are within this book.
I think so. It's 500 pages. They better be.
500 or more?
500 just about, and then there's the notes in the index.
So the myth of normal...
Or 18 and a half hours on the Audible that I narrated.
The myth of normal, trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture, Gabor Mate and Daniel Mate.
With
Daniel Mate, a.k.a. you. The book is... not yet available as a paperback and as a hard copy in Serbia yet, but I think it will be.
Public Practicum, I think, is the
publisher.
The publisher.
The publisher.
We have a deal.
Yeah, so it's going to be very soon.
Probably 2023.
Yeah, but if you're impatient, you can order it online and you can hear it as an audiobook also, which was read by you.
Yes. So if you're having allergic reactions while you listen to this podcast and you're getting itchy skin or breaking out into hives, see your doctor before you order the audiobook because it could be you're allergic to my voice. If, on the other hand, you find yourself feeling like you're relaxing into a warm Epsom salt bath, you're like, this feels good, then maybe it's the audiobook for you.
Maybe it is the audiobook for you. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much because I know this has been grueling for you, flying and, not eating and everything. And there's a lot of things that you have to do today. You don't have much time here in Serbia, but welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it was a beautiful conversation and hope to see and hear more of you in the future.
My total pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
That's it. We're done. Bye.
Bye.
Hmm.